Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this meeting of the Planning and Development Council of the Town of Oakville. This evening, I'm going to be able to exercise one of the few direct powers that a mayor has, which is to change the agenda for the convenience of the meeting. We have an item that's sort of last on the agenda called item number 6 concerning McLaughlin College. And that application has been withdrawn by the applicant. And as a result, what we need from the council, and I'm pretty sure we'll find it, if I can get to that page. Pardon?
Should we move into committee of the whole?
Yeah, we should, but when we get to, as soon as we do a couple of housekeeping things, we're going to take notice of the fact that the application has been withdrawn. And I'm making that announcement because I have a feeling some of you might be here for that item. And anybody here for that item? One, just a couple. So you won't be inconvenienced by waiting all night to get to that item. But everybody else is waiting for something else. So could I have a counselor, or could I have two counselors move in second, resolving the committee, the whole, Counselor Lischina and Counselor Longo, all in favor? And that puts us into the relaxed rule conditions of our committee of the whole session. Council, you have 3 consent items before you: the partial assumption of the Biddington subdivision, the 703rd line road widening, and the downtown mitigation strategy use of municipal parking lots from the addendum agenda. Moved by Councillor Knoll. Sorry, questioned by Councillor Knoll.
Thank you, Worship, and I apologize. It's a consent item. I had meant to call staff about this, but it totally slipped my mind. I'm just curious on the Biddington matter. It appears that we are assuming block, I think it's 50, which is actually still under construction as far as I know. So I'm curious why we're assuming that, or is it just the way the map is drawn? Let me just double check if it is block 50 in my notes here. But it's the top portion that touches Glen Ashton. That's still under construction with stacked townhouses.
I'll answer this through you, Mayor Burton. So correct, the block 50 is still under construction. That's tied up through a separate site plan agreement, and there's separate securities secured through that. But the municipal works in the subdivision are ready for assumption or partial assumption, hence the reason for the report.
So even under, and it's even under that block, and all the municipal infrastructure is assumable at this point, even in an active construction zone?
So if there's any municipal infrastructure that they need to, like probably the sidewalks are going to have to be put in, that's secured through the site plan agreement.
Do we typically do that? Is that, because I've never experienced that in my ward that I'm aware of. I mean, perhaps I missed something, but I find it unusual that usually assumption happens long after the infrastructure is in place and we've worked out settling issues and all those sorts of things. It just seems odd that we're assuming a portion of a subdivision that's still actively dug up and being constructed at this time.
No, it has been done from time to time.
Okay. I've seen Commissioner Closey trying to comment. I don't know if there's something more she can help me with. Or.
I would just add that it's actually quite normal practice through the site plan process, which quite often comes way later from a subdivision being approved, that we would secure all those sidewalks and those types of things through the site plan. These two just happen to overlap, so it's not unusual for us to do it in this way.
Okay, but in the event, so in most subdivisions in my ward that I've been familiar with, when we have, there's always a walkthrough and there's always that last opportunity to just really double check the things that are not up to scratch. We still have that opportunity, and we can prosecute against, or not prosecute, but we can collect against.
Yes, you have that
Deposits
opportunity
and
secured
letters of
through the
credit.
site plan approval. So
Okay.
through the site plan agreement, all those things are still in place.
Okay, I trust our planning staff, so I'll be happy to move that.
Thank you, Councillor. May I put, Councillor Haslett-Deal, may I put the vote? All those in favor? And the consent items are adopted. I neglected to ask if there's declarations of pecuniary interest, and Councillor O'Meara, I recognize you for your declaration.
Thank you, Your Worship. As declared previously in the statutory public meeting, I will be declaring a declaration of pecuniary interest on item number 8, the recommendation report zoning bylaw amendment for 240 Leyland Avenue PetSmart. as that business may operate competing services to the one which my wife works at, which is down the road. So I'll get that form over to the clerk. Thank you, Your Worship.
Thank you, Councillor. All right, Council, that brings us to the public meeting report for 320 Bronte Road. And this is the, for the benefit of the public, this is a report and a session on council where we don't make a decision on the application. We hear what the public have and what council members may have to say about the application. And then staff, when they go away to write their recommendation report, are able to consider the views of the public and the questions raised by council. So if you will give your attention now to Charlie McConnell, our Manager of Current Planning, and to Mark Simeone, our Director of Planning.
Thank you, Your Worship. I just wanted to take a moment at the start of item 3 and item 4 to point out a peculiarity with respect to both these items. As you are aware, the province of Ontario has made some changes to planning legislation. Some are pending and some are in effect as of May 16th. So in the case of item 3, which is a public meeting report, the next time you see that, there'll be a different growth plan in effect. Same with item 4. The other issue that we're noting for the benefit of council is that the Bill 108 changes the standard of review that was issued by the province under Bill 139. So we haven't seen the transition regulations yet, so it's unclear for us to give you any advice at this point in time as to whether or not by the time 3 and 4 come back to you, those changes will be in effect. But again, we're making you aware of that, and as soon as we have that information, we'll be reporting back to you.
Thank you. Mr. McConnell.
Okay, thank you, Your Worship and members of council. An official plan amendment, a zoning bylaw amendment, a draft plan of subdivision, and a draft plan of condominium application has been submitted for the properties at 320 to 350 Bronte Road, comprising of a development of 28 townhouse units, 1 new single detached dwelling unit, and a change in use of the existing daycare building to a residential use. The report can be found on page 25 of tonight's agenda. The purpose of tonight's meeting is to obtain further public input related to this application. These air photos identify the site and its context within the surrounding area. The subject property is located on the west side of Bronte Road, north of Rebecca Street. The entire property, including lands below the top of bank, is approximately 1.9 hectares in size. Currently, 3 detached dwellings, a church, and a daycare exist on the subject site. This slide illustrates, sorry, it's jumping ahead. All right, my apologies. This slide illustrates the proposed development as earlier described. The land's back onto Bronte Creek, which is identified as a major valley system. The various environmental constraint limits are still to be confirmed by Halton Region, Conservation Halton, and the town of Oakville. The natural area designation limit would follow the most restrictive limit, being the 10-meter drip line setback. A number of features of the proposed development have been included within that development. With respect to the existing official plan, the site is within a stable residential community as defined in the livable local plan and is designated as low-density residential and Parkway Belt. In addition, Schedule B, being the natural features and hazard lands, identifies a portion of the rear of the properties as having the following: valley lands, area of natural and scientific interest, or an ANSI, environmentally sensitive area, and woodlands. The submitted application proposes to redesignate a portion of the subject lands from low-density residential to medium-density residential so as to permit a single detached dwelling within the medium-density designation at a density of 26 units per net hectare, and to redesignate a portion of the subject property from low-density residential to natural area and include land use permissions for a single detached dwelling within an existing structure that is located within the natural area designation. From the town's zoning bylaw, the lands are currently zoned residential low, RL-O, community use, and Parkway Belt public use, PB1. The applicant's proposed zoning bylaw amendment proposes to rezone portions of the site zoned residential low to residential medium 1, and to rezone a portion of the site zoned community use to residential medium, RM1, and residential low, and to permit a maximum height of 13.5 meters. The next two slides identify various matters that have been raised to date and will be addressed in the ultimate recommendation report. Public comments have been received on this application and are included in the report as found in Appendix C, and council should also have a package of additional public comments. These are the additional matters that have been identified. These comments, together with those raised tonight by the public and by council, will be addressed as part of the future recommendation report. In conclusion, Your Worship, staff put forth the following recommendation as shown for council's consideration. Additional comments received and as distributed to council tonight will form part of the record and be discussed in the future recommendation report. Staff will be returning to council with a recommendation at the September 9th, 2019 Planning and Development Council meeting. If you have any questions, I'd be pleased to answer them.
Thank you very much, Mr. McConnell. Council, are there questions? Councilor O'Meara.
Thank you very much, Your Worship. I have a number of questions, Mr. McConnell. Thank you very much for going over this. Have we had comments from Conservation Halton yet on the application?
No, I don't believe we have.
And will we get those comments then by the recommendation report? Is
Yes,
that the timing?
absolutely.
And I asked that specifically, well, for a number of reasons, but one is the addition to the daycare. And I'm not sure, I was under the assumption that that was actually that had some heritage value, that daycare. Is that true or not?
I haven't received such comments from our heritage staff. We'll certainly ensure to follow up with them
Yeah.
to see if there is any heritage
I thought there was an
value.
architect that I was told some famous architect designed the building at one point, but it could have been on a LARF, so I'll let you just follow up
Thank
with
you.
that.
We'll
if
certainly
that's
look
okay.
into that.
I'm wondering if you might just go over the statement on page 26 of the report where it says that staff disagrees with the characterization of the rear portion of the property as being designated low-density residential. Could you just maybe elaborate a little bit on the difference between the Parkway Belt designation and staff's disagreements with what the applicant says it's being designated as?
It's a matter that we're continuing to look into, and I think it's simply a text versus mapping change. So we'll certainly go back and refer very specifically to the Parkway Belt plan and to fully understand what the designation permissions are for that property. So we'll certainly report back on that in the recommendation report.
Thank you. And just two other outstanding questions. On page 27 at the bottom where it talks about the proposal, it says one new detached dwelling, 8,200 square feet in size. Is that the house? The house is going to be 8,200 square feet?
To you, Your Worship, that's correct. There is a proposed, and I'm just flipping to the proposal. If there's a cursor, that's, oh. Okay, so on that plan, on the upper left-hand corner, you can see detached dwelling. So that is the dwelling unit that does not exist, that is being proposed presently.
Okay. So that's not.
And it's a significantly sized dwelling.
I would say so.
So,
I would say so. Thank you. And the last question I have is just with regards to the character of the proposed development. Do we have any other townhouses in the vicinity of that area that would sort of mimic the proposed character of what's being proposed?
through you, Your Worship, not in the immediate vicinity, to the best of my recollection, and certainly not at this scale.
Thank you, Your Worship.
Thank you, Councillor O'Meara. Councillor Liz Chinna?
Thank you, Mr. McConnell, for your presentation. So my question is about the community use being rezoned to the RM1 and then RL2. So right next to it is a church, and so I'm assuming some of that land is going towards this development. So is there going to be enough parking for the church, the community use there, considering some of this land is now going to be part of a different?
As I understand, it would be the entirety of the church that would convert.
So the church is no longer there?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay.
Yes.
Very good. Thank you.
Thank you. Through Mayor Burton, through Mr. McConnell. The 1978 Parkway Belt West Plan does show the Parkway Belt going down the east side of the creek on the mapping. So are you saying that the mapping is incorrect, or somebody is saying it's not correct on the mapping of the Parkway Belt West plan, the actual plan?
No, I don't think it's the mapping. I think Mr. Simeone wanted to.
Through your worship to the councillor, it's my understanding that the way the Livable Oakville sets this up is the lands are subject to the Parkway Belt Plan designation from 1978, and Livable Oakville prescribes the policies that are in effect in that plan to apply to these lands.
Well, we have to.
What the town of Oakville has done, and in Livable Oakville, was put the Parkway Belt designation on it in the context of its own town plan. In the event that the province, for whatever reason, removed its Parkway Belt designation, there would be a policy basis for which to understand how these lands might develop.
Okay. So the Parkway Belt is on the western portion of those lands, because it's on the east part of the creek. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, through your worship, if you turn to page 35 on tab 3, item 3 in the binder, there's a map there that shows us where the boundary is and where the subject lands are. I think that gives you a good indication.
Right. I appreciate that, because I got the Parkway, 1978 Parkway Belt West plan, and I was looking at it, and I thought, well, something's wrong here, because definitely it shows going down the east side, so I appreciate that. Thank you.
Councillor Chisholm.
Thank you, Your Worship. The only question I have with respect to looking at the draft, and I know that we're only receiving this tonight, but there's only one entrance and exit onto Brownie Road. I would suspect there's going to be traffic studies and a lot of work done on that with respect to Brownie Road and the issues we have now. I would really be appreciative of coming back to council with a detailed on that, because I think that's one of the probably the concern with respect to this development.
Through your worship, we'll certainly look at it from a traffic perspective, of circulation, ingress and egress, capacity of the transportation system to absorb this proposed development. So we'll deal with that in quite some detail in the final report.
Councillor O'Meara.
Sorry, Your Worship, I forgot one last thing. Sorry, Mr. McConnell. It has to do with the condominium element, and I'm wondering if you might just share with us sort of some of the issues why in the official plan we discourage condominium elements from development.
So through your worship, there is a policy in the current official plan that strongly discourages private condominium development. It's a private road. It can lead to a disconnect of a proposed development from the broader community. It's usually at a substandard design, which can lead to circulation problems, garbage pickup, snow removal, ultimate complaints back to the municipality to absorb those services. But usually it's the disconnection of the proposed development from the broader community.
And we would be looking at that condominium element with relation to the transportation study as well, in terms of the turning and the maneuvering, and if the roads are a little smaller in there, would we take a look at that for this application as well?
That's correct.
Thank you.
Councillor Robertson.
In terms of the height that has been asked for at 13.5 meters, is there anything in that area that reflects that height?
Through your worship, I don't believe there is. And I know in the application, when they state that as a height, it might be in relation to the datum or the elevation, within the site, as opposed to the height at the property line. That might be the rationale for that height. Again, we'll look at that in great detail to determine how the proposed development and the height of that would integrate with the surrounding community.
Good, thank you very much.
Thank you, Council. Madam Clerk, I understand we have some registered delegations for this item. Would you call the delegations?
We have one registered delegation for this item, and it's Reverend Jim Gill.
Reverend Gill. Welcome. Council looks forward to your information.
Thank you. As a 35-year resident of this area, living close by, as a parent of 2 children that went to that daycare, having used the Nazarene Church many times when our facilities were not available, I have a great sense of knowledge of that corner. And my number one concern is safe access and exit to this property. It's a highly congested road. It's a very dangerous intersection, especially from 4 to 6:30 p.m. You also have a fire station at that corner. My wife has been hit there twice. I was rear-ended recently there. There's just too much traffic on the road in the intersection, the way it's currently built. This will only be made worse, of course, by the soon-to-be occupied Bronte Mall rental units and the proposed development farther down Bronte Road. The greatest danger I see is turning left to go north on Bronte Road from these properties. I would suggest that there be no left turns, that's north, coming out of this property, only ones going right south. Recently, it took me 50 minutes at 5 p.m. at night to get from the Bronte GO station to my office at the corner of Bronte Road and Lakeshore. And most of it lay with this corner. There were no accidents as the concern of this delay. One of the solutions I see is a continuous southbound right turn lane from the entrance to Petro-Canada Park south to Rebecca. I recall when Bronte Road from Rebecca north to Spears was redeveloped a number of years ago, there was great consideration of 4 lanes coming south. And for a variety of reasons, it was only the 1 lane coming south. And so much of the congestion is coming south and turning right onto Rebecca. I also support the idea of only 1 road in and out. The original plan at the meeting we attended at the Church of the Nazarenes suggested 2. In addition to making Bronte Road 2 lanes going south, it would improve if it started at Waterford and came south. It would deal with the general congestion in that area at rush hour. My second concern are the 8 parking spaces are not enough for this project. Most people never use their garages, they're full of junk. So that only means 1 parking space per unit, with people who will own these units probably having 2 or more cars. I suggest 30 extra parking spaces, with the land coming from reducing the total units, maybe from 30 to 20. With only 30 units and only 8 spots, people will naturally park on Bridge Road. If you ever tried to drive along Bridge Road from May to September, especially when there's soccer games happening at Glen Allen Park, it's impossible. Congestion in this will be made worse by this parking situation. I also see the danger of jaywalking at Bronte Road to go across to park on Bridge. There's very poor light area in this area. I've walked it as a pedestrian numerous times on both sides of Bronte Road, and I think that should be improved. I like the design of the units. I would like to see all the protected valley lands protected. It is beautiful down there where the daycare center is, but I have problems with the parking and with the congestion at the corner of Bronte and Rebecca. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Reverend. Madam Clerk, the next delegation, please. Oh, are there other members of the public with information for council and staff on this matter? That's a yes? Yes, sir. Please come down, introduce yourself, and share your information.
Your Worship, my name's Bob Farkas, and I live at 315 Bronte Road, which is just directly across from where this development is going. And my driveway almost runs parallel to the entrance to the church. So I know personally how bad Bronte Road, going down and trying to get into my driveway, is. So I understand you have to, if the town's best interest for development. But I think the size of the development is too big for the area. It's going to cause more traffic problems. And it also, as Reverend Gill said, the parking is going to get a lot worse on Bridge Road. So from a personal, like I said, I find it now, traffic is busy as it is. Now, if you get 30 units there and 2 cars per unit, it's almost like 60 cars extra. And this is going to be not just in the morning and in the evening, kids picking up the daycare, but all the time. So, thank you.
Councilor Chenna? Oh. You're right, the red light didn't come on. All right, I think we've come to the point where we need a resolution. Mr. Planning Director, are there any issues to add to the resolution?
Thank you, Your Worship. So first item we'll be investigating is there a heritage designation with respect to the daycare. I can't advise it. I've been just advised by heritage staff that there is none, but I'll leave it on the list. A report back on the Parkway Belt designation on the westerly portion of the subject lands, just to reconfirm that concern that was raised by council. Will there be traffic studies with details regarding ingress and egress, traffic circulation, focusing on safety and the amount of parking within the development? And traffic study will also consider the impact of the condo roads and the operations of the same and the traffic flow within the site. And lastly, the question, how height will be determined and managed and integrated within the surrounding context?
Thank you, Mr. Planning Director. Is there a councillor from Ward 1 who'd like to make this motion? Councillor O'Meara, thank you. All those in favor? And that is carried. Now, ladies and gentlemen and council, we have, ladies and gentlemen of council, we have a public meeting report, same kind of report, for the Acclaim Health and Community Care Services at 2250 Spears Road. And our presenter is Melissa Dalrymple, who's the planner on the file. And we also have 5 listed delegations, and I'll be polling the audience after them in case anybody else has come up with ideas to share. Ms. Dalrymple, we're all ears. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and members of council. This is a zoning bylaw amendment application for 2250 Spears Road. As you've mentioned, tonight is the statutory public meeting, and the staff report can be found on page 75 of tonight's agenda. This air photo identifies the site and its context with the surrounding area. The subject lands are located on the south side of Spears Road, east of Bronte Road, and west of Third Line. The site is currently developed with a single-story industrial building and a parking area. Surrounding land uses include low-density residential dwellings to the south and office and industrial uses to the east, west, and north. The subject lands are designated office employment by the Livable Oakville Plan. The subject lands are also identified as being part of the town's urban structure within the employment mixed-use corridor along Spears Road. And this is also identified as a regional transit priority corridor. A range of uses are permitted within office employment designations, including offices, hotels, public halls, light industrial uses and training facilities. Limited commercial retail, accessory retail, and service commercial uses are also permitted in conjunction with primary permitted uses. The subject lands are zoned E1, office employment, by zoning bylaw 2014-14. A wide range of uses are permitted in the office employment zone. The proposed zoning bylaw amendment would retain the base office employment zoning and add a site-specific special provision for the subject lands. Although office uses and daycare uses are permitted through the existing E1 zoning, daycare uses are restricted to 20% of the net floor area of a permitted use, and overnight care is not permitted on the subject lands. In terms of use, the applicant has requested consideration for overnight respite care, as well as to expand the permitted daycare use to 80% of the net floor area of the building. Site-specific regulations for reduced side yard and landscape area would also be required to accommodate the proposed site layout. The proposed zoning bylaw amendment would allow the conversion of an existing building into a dementia care facility, providing services including family caregiver support, an adult day program, and short-stay overnight respite care. The development would repurpose the existing one-story building, reconfigure the existing parking area, and result in the addition of landscape areas along the south and west property lines. Vehicle access from Spears Road to the parking area would continue to be provided by a driveway located on the west side of the property. The proposed use of the building is allocated between administrative offices and staff area, the adult day program area, and respite care. The largest portion of the building, approximately 80%, is proposed for the adult day program, which would allow for the care of 30 clients and would operate 12 hours per day, 7 days a week. The administrative office areas include meeting rooms and caregiver lounges to provide for family support and education. The respite care area includes 8 beds for clients to use for up to 2 weeks consecutively. Clients using the overnight care beds would take part in the adult day program, providing for 24-hour care during their stay. A public information meeting was hosted by the applicant on February 6, 2019. Matters raised by the public included potential impacts of the development on the residential uses to the south, including things like lighting and noise from the parking lot. And in response to the notice of tonight's meeting, one written public comment was received, which expressed concern related to potential impacts of the proposed use on the viability of business operations in the area. A complete analysis of the application is underway, and the matters listed on this slide have been identified to date. Town and regional planning staff have met with the applicant twice to discuss the outcome of the technical review, and the applicant is actively engaged in preparing a resubmission for review. Comments received from the public and council tonight will also be considered and included in the forthcoming recommendation report. Again, the purpose of tonight's meeting is to obtain comments from members of council and the public, and in the future, staff will return to council with a recommendation report. Staff put forth the following recommendations for council's consideration.
Thank you very much for the report. Council, do you have questions? Councillor Chinna.
Thank you very much, Your Worship. There was a note made, or a letter, I guess, submitted from a local business, I guess, next door or one over, indicating that there's significant noise from that business. Do you know, are there restrictions for overnight hours with respect to noise if we're planning to have people sleep at this particular location overnight? Do we have noise restrictions there at all?
Through you, Mr. Mayor. The recommendation report will include the result of the peer review of the noise studies that were submitted with the application.
Okay.
And through that process, we can also deal with any noise bylaw.
So currently, the industrial uses or office employment doesn't have restrictions for overnight noise. I'm just trying to find out if that's the case or not.
And we check into it as part of the recommendation report coming back, but I don't believe they have specific requirements. There are some, actually, I'd wait until we look into it and see what the restrictions are.
Great, thank you.
Councillor O'Meara.
Thank you, Your Worship. I have a question with regards to the comments on page 88, where it says that the town and the regional staff have identified significant policy conformity issues with the current proposal and require that the planning justification report be revised and resubmitted to address these policies. Maybe can you just explain what those issues are and perhaps what the dilemma is that a claim finds itself in trying to figure out where to put itself?
Through you, Mr. Mayor. The challenge in reviewing this application as it was submitted was the manner in which the initial planning justification report described the use. initially, that planning justification report referred to the use as a long-term care facility, which triggered some issues with not only the town and regional employment conversion policies, but also with PPS and growth plan conformity. So the regional planning staff as well as town planning staff have met with the applicants twice. I believe we're all on the same page now, and they're actively preparing a resubmission, which would include another planning justification report.
So town and regional staff are aware that it's actually not a long-term care facility, and are we comfortable with understanding what the model is that they're trying to do there?
Through you, Mr. Mayor. Last week, we did have a meeting with their new planning consultant on the file, and they explained to us the concept of considering this use as a community use. So staff are interested in seeing the details explained in the planning justification report.
And have we, as at a staff level, looked to other areas where this has been done to look at what planning definitions they've used to accommodate short-term respite?
Through you, Mr. Mayor. The new planner on the file made us aware of a new definition that the City of Toronto is using for overnight respite care. So we will be looking into that definition and following up, giving you information in the recommendation report.
And I know you wouldn't speak for the region, but is the region on the same page with this? Because it will have to obviously align in two different levels. So is the region committed to doing that as well then?
Both the town and the regional staff are interested in getting a chance to review the resubmission before passing judgment on it.
Okay, fine. Thank you very
Thank
much,
you.
Your Worship.
Before I call on you, Councillor Chisholm, I'd like to ask a follow-up question from Councillor O'Meara, if you don't mind. Sir? Ms. Dalrymple, on the matter of who called it a long-term care facility, I just would ask you to clarify that it was the applicant, not us, who called it a long-term care facility, perhaps not understanding that those words have given meanings.
That's correct, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Chisholm.
Thank you, Worship. On the same lines, I just need clarity with respect to, this long-term. Does that have impact with the additional development charge may be applicable to this if it's classified as a long-term, or is it development charges applied even if it's short-term respite care?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, we would have to wait and see what comes in with the revised resubmission to have our finance department relook at the application. They did flag that a long-term care facility would trigger some concerns with development charges, which were flagged in this report, but I'm not sure how they would view a different classification for the use.
So what you're saying is the suggestion is when it's classified as it stands right now, we need to have clarity, is a long-term care facility would trigger development charges
Yes,
coming into effect.
that's
Thank
correct.
you.
Anybody else on council? Ms. Dalrymple, I have a question for you. Are you going to be, is staff going to be evaluating this with regard to the D series guidelines of the Ministry of Environment on planning? I call your attention to this one line from the D series guidelines. The guideline is intended, it says, to be applied in the land use planning process to prevent or minimize future land use problems due to the encroachment of sensitive land uses and industrial land uses on one another. And I'm curious as to how we're going to navigate. This sounds like a sensitive land use if I ever heard of one, and this is E1. And the point of the guidelines is to protect against future conflicts so that the neighboring E1 users who may not have a use that is negative on this sensitive use, that we sort of sterilize future uses if we're not careful on the neighboring lands. So that's the point and the value of the D guidelines as I understand them. And I'm hoping to hear that that evaluating this against the D guidelines will be included.
Through your worship, yes, we will, in fact, and I've noted as for the resolution that you'll be passing later on.
Madam Clerk, are there registered delegations? If so, please call them.
Our first listed delegation is Anthony James.
Welcome. Council looks forward to your information.
Good evening, Your Worship and Council. My name is Anthony James. My loved one is Molly James, who currently has dementia. Since January the 1st, 2015, to current, my loved one, Molly James, attends the Adult Day program. It provides, by Acclaim Health, Monday, Wednesdays, and Fridays. The programming outside the home for individuals with Alzheimer's, dementia, or other physical impairments. Participants enjoy time with others, going with their loved ones, while caregivers have peace of mind knowing that their loved one is safe and having fun. The director and their team is the best of the best. Respite care, safe overnight stays for your loved one while you complete personal tasks. Excuse me. Have a break. Respite care from time to time. It is necessary for you to temporarily step away from your caregiver role so you can have a rest, rebuild your strength. You do not have, if you do not have this, you will suffer the consequences. In conclusion, what Oakville have done with the natural environment, tree canopies, parks, recreational activities for all ages. Now we need to focus on supporting caregivers in providing respite opportunities. This all builds a stronger, livable community together. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. James. Madam Clerk, the next delegation.
The next delegation is Mary Lee.
Ms. Lee, welcome. Council looks forward to your information.
Good evening, Mayor Burton and members of the council. My name is Mary Louie, and I would like to speak on behalf of my husband, Alex Louie, and myself this evening in support of a Acclaim Health application and the necessary zoning bylaw changes. The proposed new dementia care will bring innovative dementia care right in Oakville. As a healthcare provider and patient care coordinators for over 30 years in Oakville, my husband and I came across a lot of families struggling to care for their loved one with dementia. As we all know, we are experiencing a dementia epidemic in Canada, and our community is not immune. Caring for person with dementia requires a huge amount of professional and family support. Currently, there's no overnight respite care for dementia in our community. We're seeing patients having to travel long distance to get respite care in Peel and Hamilton. Respite service benefit person with dementia, as well as the caregiver who otherwise never get a day off or a night off. This new facility will remedy the biggest service gap in Halton and improve the quality of life of many seniors and their families. Therefore, this zoning bylaw changes should not be denied. I hope we'll get your attention. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Louie. Madam Clerk?
The next delegation is Frank Burry.
Welcome, Mr. Burry. Council looks forward to your information.
My name is Frank Burry. My wife Evelyn was diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease by a geriatrician in 2001. I cared for her at home, and her dementia progressed slowly, but her care needs increased with time. In 2009, I arrived home from shopping to find her laying on the Chesterfield, trembling uncontrollably in a state of shock. I sent her by ambulance to the hospital, where she was diagnosed with a urinary tract infection. After treatment, I was told that the cause was lack of bathing and referred me to the Community Care Access Center. CCAC arranged to have personal support workers from Acclaim Health bathe Evelyn initially twice per week and eventually 3 times per week. I also became aware of the day program at Acclaim Health in 2010 and enrolled Evelyn to attend multiple times per week. This program provided her with the mental stimulation she did not receive sitting at home. It also developed her interest in art, which she still is involved today. She attended the program for 7 years until she was admitted into long-term care. In these later stages, I experienced abnormal fatigue looking after Evelyn at home and needed to find respite care for her so I could recover my strength in order to continue providing the care she required. I was unable to find any provider of respite care in Oakville. I chose to send her to Nora's house in Mississauga. Nora's house operated by the Alzheimer's Society of Peel. Unfortunately, they can only accommodate 10 people at a time, so I had to be placed on a waiting list and book a short-term stay in advance. Without this respite care, I would have found it very difficult to continue as a caregiver. Respite care is a very important element for the needs of the caregiver. I urge Council to consider seriously the provision of respite care as proposed by Acclaim Health. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Burry. Madam Clerk, the next delegation.
The next delegation is Ali Amaral.
Welcome, Ms. Amaral. Council looks forward to your information.
Thank you. And good evening, Your Worship and fellow Town Council. So my name is Ali Amaral, and it is my pleasure to be here today to speak to you about the extraordinary care that my mother has been receiving with Acclaim Health. So our family's world was first severely shaken in July 2013 when my father passed away. And shortly after his death, my mother was able to live quite independently on her own for a few years in her own home. But then my sisters and I began to notice a slow decline in how she was functioning and how she was living. During Mom and Dad's almost 50 years of marriage, Mom was always very independent, very strong-willed. She was able to physically care for Dad during his illness. However, a couple of years after his death, our world was shaken up yet again when we slowly started noticing Mom forgetting how to complete some very routine tasks at home. Mom's neighbors would call me a few times to tell me that they had found Mom wandering the neighborhood. You see, unlike my father, whom we saw physically deteriorate, Mom's deterioration wasn't quite as visible. So instead we noticed a slow change and deterioration in Mom's mental health and how she wasn't able to care for herself and live alone in her home. Consequently, in 2017, both my sisters and I had no choice but to sell Mom's home in Toronto because she could no longer care for herself, and thus began our journey into learning about dementia and care for Mom, while also working full-time and caring for our own families. This journey has been truly exhausting for my sisters and I, and extremely difficult to manage, given Mom's ongoing anxiety attacks, her inability to cook for herself, to care for herself, including her own personal hygiene. There is little self-awareness. Thankfully, we were connected to Acclaim Health right after Mom moved in with each of us, and I personally took part in Acclaim Health's Dementia Information Series, which began shortly after Mom's diagnosis and acceptance into the day program. I learned so much about this awful disease. Acclaim Health and Community Care Services has been an amazing and supportive program for Mom and for my sisters and I as her caregivers. They have been invaluable because caring for Mom is so exhausting, both physically and mentally. We have to ensure that she takes her medication, that she bathes, that she eats, that she drinks. She doesn't even remember if she's eaten, and to be honest, she doesn't even know when she's thirsty until she is dehydrated. There seems to be no logic and reason with Mom on many occasions. We notice how disengaged and withdrawn she is. Nonetheless, we always try to be present with her and to pay attention to what she is doing. It's almost like having a child again at home. Having said all this, my sisters and I feel we are one of the lucky families because Mom still remembers us. But we know with this disease that her memory, her vocabulary, her understanding, and her speech will only get worse. So Mom continues to this day to rotate living with my sisters and I on a weekly basis because, quite frankly, this is all we can manage. You see, after a week of caring for Mom, we need a break from her. And it saddens me to say this, but it is the truth. And we have help because, you see, Mom does attend the day program 5 days a week, Monday to Friday from 8:30 until 4:30. The day program has been a huge relief for my sisters and I because we can go to work, we can concentrate on what we have to do, while knowing that Mom is safe and happy with people who know her. And Mom loves it there. When my sisters and I learned of the new dementia care center, which will be providing the short stay overnight respite beds, we were elated because now we will have the option of also getting reprieve at night. Dementia is affecting families at a much younger age. I know from my own personal experience just how needed these services are, because what I have learned is that this disease really is bigger than us. And I'm so grateful for Acclaim Health for creating this community of support. My sisters and I honestly don't know how we would have managed without Acclaim Health, and knowing that we will also be getting some reprieve at night with the overnight respite beds. This overnight care is so necessary because as a caregiver, I know how desperate I am at the end of the week when my mom is with me in my home to have a break from her care. The new facility will provide all families who desperately need a meaningful break from caregiving overnight. It really is so hard to live my life fully when mom is in my care. And while I am grateful that she is with me, I'm exhausted. The new facility is not just for my sisters and I, but really for all the people who will be diagnosed with dementia in the coming years. I'm honored to be here, and I feel such gratitude to be a part of the Acclaim Health community, which has come together to really transform the lives of people with dementia and their caregivers for the better. Acclaim Health has been a godsend, and the people in the program really care. My sisters and I are very thankful. It's been comforting to know that we're not alone in dealing with this awful disease. Clearly, given what you've heard from me here today, Council, I am here because I have a very strong support toward the new Dementia Care Center in Oakville. And it is my hope that Council support this facility and the goal of Acclaim Health to transform dementia care in Halton for the better. Thank you.
Thank you for your information.
Our last listed delegation is Emma West.
Ms. West, welcome. Council looks forward to your information.
Good evening. I'm Emma West. I'm a partner at Bouse Fields, a planning and urban design consulting firm working with Acclaim Health. Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak to you. As you heard, I was recently brought on to the project, and we will be preparing a resubmission addressing the comments from the region and the town with respect to the application. It's my opinion that this use is permitted on the site. It is a community use. Community uses are permitted in all land use designations according to the town's official plan. That official plan, of course, was approved and is in conformity with the region's official plan. And so as an employment area, the use would have been contemplated in the context of the growth plan and the fact that it's an employment area within the policy requirements of the region's official plan and the town's official plan. So given that this is a community use, it would be permitted in this employment area. I would also address some of the comments that were made earlier with respect to noise. A noise study will be peer reviewed. There's also an air quality study that has been prepared and will be peer reviewed that addresses the D6 guidelines. And if you think about the site, Ms. Dalrymple had put up the site context in her presentation. Directly south of the property is a residential area. And so any uses on the adjacent properties would also have to take into account their proximity to the residential properties to the south. And therefore, in consideration of any potential future uses in the area, they would also have to take into account the residential properties directly south of these employment lands. Again, all of this will be outlined in the resubmission that we provide. Another key point of clarification is that with respect to the long-term care use that had been proposed before, Acclaim is not regulated by the Long-Term Care Act. In fact, it's regulated by the Home and Community Care Act, which is a completely different piece of legislation, which is why it is important that this not be defined as a long-term care facility. And in particular, it doesn't even meet the definition of what a long-term care facility would be. Reference was made to providing some additional examples about respite care definitions in zoning bylaw amendments. It is a use that is not seen in every community, and obviously the Oakville zoning bylaw doesn't currently have a definition for respite care. But the City of Toronto, for example, has one in the bylaw from 2013, which is referred to as the new City of Toronto bylaw, despite the fact that that was a few years ago. And that definition addresses the fact that it is a premises used for the provision of short-term, non-emergency services for the supervised care of people of any age in order to provide relief to their caregivers. So that definition in the zoning bylaw specifically references the relief that it gives to the caregivers, which I think you've heard a lot about this evening. So those are just some of the key items that we will be addressing in our resubmission. And it's my opinion that this proposal for a zoning bylaw amendment to permit this use on the site in the form that it is proposed, with the day care for the adults, the overnight respite care, and the services to support the caregivers as well, is consistent with the provincial policy statement, conforms to the growth plan, and also conforms to the region's official plan, and is consistent with the town's official plan. Also keeping in mind that you adopted official plan amendments 26 and 27, which relate to this area, specifically employment, office employment being redesignated as business employment in this area, and also the Spears Road corridor study. So in that context, it's my professional planning opinion that this zoning bylaw amendment is appropriate.
Thank you very much for clearing all that up for us. Councillor Elgar has a question.
Thanks for coming tonight. I appreciate it. I'm just trying to understand then why you're asking for a zoning bylaw amendment. You're saying it's already allowed in our current zoning, is what I thought I heard you say.
Oh, I'll clarify that through you, Mr. Mayor. The respite care definition within the zoning bylaw is not there. So despite the fact that in your official plan, it is where community use is permitted, and therefore this would be an employment type use consistent with the E1 employment, which if you look at the official plan amendment for the conversion from office employment to business employment, business park employment, the intent is to ultimately change the use within these lands south of Spears to convert from the office employment designation in the official plan to business park employment. So getting to the zoning right now permits a range of uses which include daycare and office. The zoning bylaw amendment would be to increase the proportion of daycare within the building and to also add the overnight beds as an additional permitted use within there. If you think of it, hotels are permitted use within the E1 zoning category, and this is for a temporary stay for someone. It could be a night with a limit generally of up to 2 weeks of stay throughout a calendar year. So maybe they're going to stay for 1 night or 2 nights, but over the calendar year, that would add up to no more than 2. So hotel is currently permitted in the zoning, office is currently permitted in the zoning, daycare, up to 20% in the E1 is permitted. So it would be, and the definition of daycare in the Oakville bylaw includes children and adults. So it would be increasing the amount of the building that would be used for the daycare, as well as adding the permission specifically for respite, which you could consider very similar to the hotel use that's permitted.
Do you know why initially it came in as long-term care facility?
I wasn't involved then, so I was not privy to the discussions. Okay. I don't know specifically why.
Okay, but you're saying it's not a long-term care facility, it is a community uses facility?
Exactly, yes.
Okay, I thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. West.
Thank you.
Any others, Ms. Monaco? Any other members of the audience with planning information for council on this matter? All right, council, Councillor Robertson is going to be the mover of record, and Mr. Director, are you going to add the details?
Yes, Your Worship, through you to council. In addition to the other matters, staff will consider a peer review of the noise studies as part of the review. What local bylaw implications are there regarding noise? What have other jurisdictions successfully done with respect to overnight respite care? What development charges will be applied to this proposal? Staff are to consider the D6 series guidelines as part of their review of this application. And the wording on this one is a little bit tough. Staff are to work with to understand how best to characterize this use so as to properly assess it and determine the appropriate policy response.
Yeah, good luck with that. I don't understand that either. I'm reminded of a case we had where we heard that zoning has to conform upward to the official plan. And Ms. West has reminded us of our official plan change to business park from office. So I'll be interested to see how the new OP, what kind of room, what kind of scope does that give for the requested zoning change? If you'd add that. So with that, can I call the vote? All those in favor? Opposed, if any, and that's carried. Now we come to item 5, and that is the recommendation report and zoning bylaw amendment and draft plan of subdivision for 47 Nelson Street. And we have a presentation from Charlie McConnell, our manager of current planning. And we have 2 listed delegations, and I'll poll the audience for others.
Okay, thank you, Your Worship, members of council. So this is a recommendation report that's being brought forward with respect to lands at 47 Nelson Street. And this is to consider the redevelopment of the lands to accommodate 4 ultimately street townhouse units on these lands. So this air photo identifies the site and its context within the surrounding area. Just by way of background, the subject property is located on the east side of Nelson Street, south of Marine Drive. The property is 948 square meters in size. Currently, a detached dwelling and a separate garage exists on the site. Surrounding the property are residential uses in the form of 3 detached dwellings to the immediate north, semi-detached dwelling units to the south, multiple attached dwellings, and an apartment building to the west. The photos at the bottom of the slide highlight a view of the property from Nelson Street. This plan reflects the revised development as submitted on April 5th, 2019. Again, it's for 4 townhouse units with individual direct access onto Nelson Street. Under this proposal, 3 driveways from Nelson Street are proposed. 2 parking spaces will be provided, or are to be provided, within each garage by means of a mechanical lift system with 1 parking space in the driveway. The proposed units would be 3 stories in height. And this slide simply illustrates the elevations from a front and rear perspective. So from the perspective of the livable Oakville plan, the site is within the Bronte Village growth area where intensification is promoted and is designated as medium density residential. The medium residential designation permits multiple attached dwellings with a density range of 30 to 50 units per site hectare. The application as submitted conforms with the medium density designation as multiple attached dwelling units are proposed where the density is 42 units per site hectare. From a zoning bylaw perspective, the site is currently zoned existing development ED. The application is submitted is seeking a site-specific zoning amendment to rezone the site to a site-specific RM1 zone consistent with the medium-density designation, and includes a revised special provision related to the minimum lot frontage of 28.3 meters, where the RM1 zone requires 30.5 meters. The previous increase to the maximum height regulation has been withdrawn, and that was brought forward as information at the March 18th, 2019 public meeting. So in the analysis of the application that's in front of us tonight, staff had heard all the input that was received at that public meeting, and a number of issues had been raised, ranging from the archaeological and historical investigation. A stage 1 investigation was done, and it suggested that a further analysis and survey be done, and if it was warranted based on that study, then individual site excavation would be undertaken if warranted. An issue was raised with respect to whether or not this represented overdevelopment. A detailed analysis was done of many of the surrounding developments in the area, and it was found that this was, in fact, a very consistent and compatible form of development, given the fact that it is within a growth area. It is designated as medium-density residential, and the area does support similar forms of housing, as well as apartment-style buildings within the area as well. An issue was raised with respect to the parking in the driveways as shown. The buildings were, the front yard setback was increased to allow for on-site parking, particularly where it's now being proposed to have one shared driveway in the middle, and I'll speak further to that momentarily. The issue of height was raised, and as mentioned, the height request for relief had been withdrawn, so it would now be compliant with the maximum 12-meter height provision under the RM1 zone. An issue of the minimum lot frontage. Again, the overall frontage of this property is 28.3 meters, wherein under the RM1 zone is 30.5 meters. So it's a relatively minor deviation from the standard, and there would be no measurable impacts from the slight reduction in the lot frontage. So it is a reduction to the lot frontage that could be supported. The issue of future lot conformity with respect to the RM1 zone for each individual lots. There is a regulation that a minimum of 135 square meters is provided for each individual lot, and each of these significantly exceeds that minimum lot area. So the lots themselves are quite deep in nature. An issue of easements and how they would be supported for, whether it be for maintenance or for stormwater management purposes, or for the shared driveway that is being proposed, again, which I will speak to, can be appropriately accommodated for in this development through the future part lot control process and through the site plan control process. An issue was raised with respect to shadowing and whether or not a shadow study would be warranted for this proposal. Typically, shadow studies are only warranted where the proposal is for 5 stories or greater in development, and this certainly is not that case, and a shadow study was not requested. Another issue that was raised was with respect to views to the property or through the property down to Lake Ontario from properties to the north. And it was noted that this is a relatively built-up urban area, so views are impeded presently based on that urban form and by the mature vegetation that does exist as well. So one of the more significant issues that was raised was one of tree preservation. And there are 4 street trees that exist within the road allowance adjacent to the property. And they are numbered 1, 2, 3, and 4 on the plan. So an arborist report and then ultimately a tree protection audit was done based on the sensitivity of the proximity of the trees to the proposed development and some reasonable assurance that the trees could be in fact be preserved while supporting some level of development on the property. So air spading and a dry vac root investigation was undertaken in March and April of this year, where there was selective excavation in proximity to the trees to identify the root system that existed in relation to the lands themselves. It was identified that there were roots that were in close proximity to the surface of the soil. These feeder roots were minor in size. They were ranging in size from 2 to 4 centimeters, which are considered very small and would not substantially impact the survivability of the trees given the proposed surrounding development. The larger, what that means is that the larger, more trunk roots would be located at a deeper depth, at a greater depth than the top surface. So from that perspective, it was felt that development could proceed through more detailed examination through the site plan process to ensure the selective, the very careful placement of the driveways in proximity to those trees. The underlying root system would not be detrimentally impacted that would affect the health of those trees. The significant feature that can be highlighted is the two interior units. There's an existing driveway that does exist there presently. So that driveway could be utilized to service 2 dwelling units on the interior, units 47B and 47C. And then that driveway would flare out as it encroaches into the property and access the individual garages to those 2 units. So that's an existing paved driveway presently. It may have to be widened ever so slightly to accommodate vehicular traffic into those 2 sites, but it could be a shared driveway servicing both. There's a significant tree, number 1, which seems to be the most mature tree. And for that particular property, there may have to be some greater attention paid to the surface material of the driveway itself, either interlock paver stones where water could infiltrate into the ground to support the root system, or a granular type of base. So that additional investigation of that root system could occur through the site plan process to the satisfaction of the town and the town's arborist to ensure that it's the most appropriate surface treatment for those properties. A holding zone is being proposed with the associated zoning, and it was only subject to the site plan approval process and the further tree investigation would the holding removal be appropriate to be lifted. So as far as next steps, again, subject to site plan approval, the holding would be in place to ensure that that is done. This is also a draft plan of subdivision. The lands aren't within a draft plan of subdivision now, and it would be required to be in one in order to allow a part lot control application to come forward to individually subdivide those lots into separate parcels. And on that basis, Your Worship, we're putting forward the following recommendation for approval.
Thank you, Mr. McConnell. Do you feel that the motion needs to mention the holding provision?
It is attached to the zoning bylaw that is on the council agenda this evening.
All right, thank you. Council, do you have questions? Councilor O'Meara.
Thank you. Thank you, Charlie. I'm just wondering if you can maybe speak to what the site plan process entails and what we can do and what we can compel the applicant to do in terms of looking after the trees through site plan.
So through the site plan process, again, first determining the precise location. So our development engineering department could ask for additional details from an arborist perspective. They could ask for additional excavation to identify additional routes, to identify that disturbance zone for the trees and the best proximity for the driveway or the driveways into the development. Securities could be taken from the proponent from a maintenance perspective, long-term maintenance, and any pruning that would be necessary for those trees to ensure that they're in greatest health, to ensure the greatest opportunity for survivability.
And what does the holding provision allow us to do to our satisfaction with the site plan process?
So the holding zone, through your worship, the holding zone would preclude any development from being allowed to proceed for the townhouse development. So it would only recognize the status quo, the existing development that does exist on site, subject to the completion of the site plan process, wherein the details for the tree preservation would be further looked at.
Thank you, Your Worship.
Thank you, Councillor. Madam Clerk, would you call the delegations?
Our first delegation is Ian McDermott.
Welcome, Mr. McDermott. Council looks forward to your information.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and Council. So my slides will come up.
Help is on the way.
All right.
Right behind you.
And which one is yours, sir? That's a good question. No. Number 5 is... It's 47 Nelson is this property, but mine was called updated.
It was called updated. Okay.
Yeah.
And how long did you put into the?
It was sent in this morning.
Was it? Okay, so it should be here.
That's it, right there, updated concerns. Item number 6.
Oh, number 6. Oh, so it is here. Item number 6. There you go. We just missed
Okay.
it. And just go next slide. You can just hit down.
All right, thank you very much. Thank you. Sorry about that in terms of finding the files. So I appreciate the opportunity again to come forward and talk, as I did back in March. And just a couple of things that I would like to actually reiterate here. In particular, talking about actually compliance with the zoning bylaws. I'll get into that. Also talking about the tree preservation. With all due respect to staff, I'm not sure I would have interpreted the arborist report in the same way. And then we do want to recognize that the height was brought down, so we appreciate that. That was a concern last time as well. So the issue is around conformance with RM1. So basically, from my perspective, within the provisions, you could, of course, designate it as an RM1, going from 28.31 and accepting that one. It's a required 30.5. And even though the regulations say that it needs to be 30.5, and I'd actually say that from the livable Oakville plan, Part F, there's 2 sections I'd like to highlight under 28.1. And that's 28.1.1, where it basically says the zoning bylaws should be used to implement the objectives and policies of the plan. And it is not intended the full range of the uses will actually be permitted just because there is the desire to have a greater density within the area. 28.8.2 seems to be sort of where people are saying, well, under special circumstances, because there's existing conditions, so other townhouse complexes in the areas only have less than 30.5, but that was previously put in places, and so those ones may be permitted, but it doesn't necessarily follow then that you should take and create non-conforming bylaw zones in that area, especially if we have a plan that says you're supposed to be conforming. So now we're talking about, with the staff recommendations, of actually having something that's non-conforming, and that's only supposed to have been for things that were previously existing. So I think a different designation, I'm not here to figure out what that designation is, but it doesn't actually fit what is the requirements in here. The other thing around the encroachment on the trees, and I think this is actually more important, and it was highlighted before, but this new arborist report actually showed that the tree protection zone, and I don't really understand why that changed, but it actually increased in size in for 3 of those trees. Trees 1, 3, and 4, the tree protection zone, as put forward by the same arborist, went from 7.2 meters to 9 meters. Number 2 stayed the same. Number 3 went from 2.4 to 3 meters, and number 4 went from 6 to 7.3 meters. That means somewhere along the line, the determination was that we actually needed more protection on these trees. And as highlighted by staff, the trees are basically from the south to north, 1, 2, 3, and 4. 3 is the smallest of the trees, and I was pleased to note that in the staff report that I saw this evening, that there was a recommendation or potential recommendation from the arborist that we talk about removing tree number 3. Totally unacceptable. Staff does not recommend that. We certainly would not recommend that either in any way, shape, or form. So first off, we've got an increased size and protection zone for the trees. And when you actually look at this, so again, looking at it from on the right-hand side is tree number 1, which is one of the larger of the 2 trees. 1 and 4 are the largest trees. And what I've highlighted in here for you is the distance from the edge of the proposed driveway to the tree. For tree number 1, it should have a tree protection zone of 9 meters, which means approximately a radius from the center of the tree of about 4.5 meters. They're proposing 2 meters. That means that that driveway would encroach significantly on the roots of the trees. For tree protection zone for tree number 2, which is just off to the next one to the north, it actually requires a radius of 3 meters. And you actually see that they actually keep it far enough away from the tree. But there is no way that they can actually increase the area of protection for tree number 1 without making tree number 2 smaller, and so therefore one of those trees is going to lose. And here they're talking about losing protection for tree number 1, which is one of the biggest and most beautiful trees that is there. For tree number 2 on the north side, they've also reduced the amount of space, and again, this was the conversation about making the driveway wider, and they've reduced the amount, so that's like 1.9 meters from the driveway to the tree, and it really should have a radius of 3. And then they are okay on the between the tree number 2 and the middle driveway. That actually meets it well within the guideline. But then for the northmost driveway, it encroaches on both trees 3 and 4, and there is nothing they can do about that driveway that will not actually, get outside of the tree protection zones for either of the trees. So you're putting those trees at risk. If you actually look up at different reports done by different groups, they'll actually tell you that trees such as this, particularly older established trees, are not necessarily going to survive root damage in the same way young, vigorous trees would. Number 3 here is actually the youngest tree, and it's probably the one that's got the least impact on here. And the bigger trees are the ones that are at greater risk. And it takes 2 to 5 years to determine that damage to the tree. So in 2 to 5 years after this if this was approved and done, we could be ending up seeing that those trees are so severely damaged that they'll actually have to come down. So it's not something we're going to know overnight in any way, shape, or form. In the arborist report as well, that they indicated that they could only go down 12 to 15 centimeters with the hydrovacking, and that there was an indication that they only saw minor roots. I would disagree that they were minor. There is a huge number of roots. All you have to do is look at the imagery. And the arborist report just says it may be that there are major roots that are actually elsewhere going throughout there. But we still actually have to be able to run all sorts of utilities and driveways in those areas. How do we know we are not going to damage major roots in terms of doing that? If you look at the Ontario Urban Forest Council, it clearly outlines, and I don't think anybody questions that benefits of trees actually make for a healthier and happier communities. If those trees get damaged, you will not have a happy community. And a place called Oakville needs to continue to actually really recognize that protecting trees is a fundamental core value. Oakville has its own urban forest strategic management plan, and under that, you're actually responsible for protecting those trees against construction And in that, it is the responsibility of the Oakville Parks and Open Space Department policy that actually says you have to put enhanced protection for town trees. And allowing this to actually go forward and put those trees at risk is not an enhanced protection for those. It is the urban forestry section of the Parks and Open Space Department is the responsibility for enforcing this policy, particularly around driveway applications. So my point to you is it can never conform to RM1. Again, we're not against change, but that designation and that density of housing impacting those trees is not going to work in there. We cannot lose sight of the invaluable wealth of those trees, and we are putting them at very high risk. And I do disagree with staff that it's not that it's a minor risk; it's a major risk. And so we actually would recommend that this is probably not the right development for this property. A different development needs to be done to protect those trees. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your information, sir. Questions? Madam Clerk, are there other delegations? One more. Would you call the next delegation?
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
The next delegation is Arlene Beaumont.
Ms. Beaumont, welcome. Council looks forward to your information.
Good evening. My name is Arlene Beaumont. I'm with the firm of Outred and Associates. We are the agents for the owners of 47 Nelson Street. I, too, am going to talk about trees. I hope to make this as brief as possible. So first of all, I want to commend staff because they've been very patient with us. We started talking about the root excavation back in February. We, of course, couldn't do it in February. We first tried on March 18th, and we couldn't get anywhere with the dry vac operation because the ground was just too frozen. We tried again on April 9th and were able to expose tree roots in 2 areas, and our arborist was able to get a good look at the structure of the root structure underneath the ground. Following the excavation, our arborist needed a few days to prepare his report, and we submitted that report to staff on April 15th. I believe that the planning recommendation report was actually either due that day or within a few days of April 15th. So staff worked to a very tight timeline to incorporate our arborist's recommendations and finalize the planning report. While we understand the reasons that council wants to adhere to the 150-day timeline, and I'm sure many developers are very happy about this timeline, in this particular instance, that tight timeline, coupled with a very difficult and long winter, did not allow sufficient time for us to complete the excavation work and speak with staff on possible options for the driveways. We simply did not have the time to find a solution before the staff report had to be finalized. We've sort of talked about a few different options for the driveways and potential alternate materials for constructing the driveway, but to date we haven't really had a chance to deal with staff and come up with an optimal solution. In the recommendation report, staff have suggested that a holding provision be applied to the lands and the development be subject to site plan approval. If council sees fit to approve this application, the site plan process will give us time to work with town forestry and construction engineering staff on the best way to position the driveways, as well as alternative driveway materials that will allow for minimal excavation and minimal impact on the trees. Further, the property owners intend to retain one of the dwelling units as their own family home, and they currently live on the property. They value the trees as much as any other resident in the neighborhood and are committed to ensuring that these 4 beautiful trees are well protected during construction and continue to be healthy for as long as possible. They have done everything requested by staff to protect the trees, including shifting the proposed building back to allow additional space between the tree canopy and the front of the building, and they are committed to further working with staff through the site plan process. In conclusion, the proposed zoning bylaw amendment implements the town's long-range vision for this property to accommodate medium-density residential development. The proposed townhomes are well-designed, complementary to existing development on Nelson Street and in the area, and will provide new homes for families wanting to live in Bronte Village, which is surely the intent of the Livable Oakville plan. The tree issues can and will be worked out through the site plan process. Thank you.
Thank you for your information. Are there questions for Councillor O'Meara?
Thank you, Your Worship. And I'm conscious not to delve too far into things that can be dealt with at site plan, but I think for the benefit of the people here, one of the letters we received was from a resident who thought that the 2-year maintenance sort of overview was a little short. Would your clients be amenable to increasing that to making sure the trees are looked after for a longer period of time than 2 years?
I think my clients would be, yes.
Okay, thank you. That's all for now. I'll have questions to staff later, Your Worship. Thank you.
Sorry, Councillor Chisholm.
Thank you, Your Worship. Just a quick question. The 4 trees, what's the species of these trees?
I'm sorry, I don't know that. I'm not an arborist and I can't tell a maple from an oak. I'm sorry, I don't know.
Well, that answers my question. Thank you. And this question is probably a little premature too, but the question is, what's the age of those trees? Do we have any indication what those age of those trees are?
That's all dealt with in the arborist report. As I believe the previous speaker mentioned, trees number 1 and 4 are the largest, and they are quite old, probably in about a 100-year range, I'm thinking. Tree number 3 is smaller, maybe about 30 years, and I'm not sure about the remaining tree. It is all in our arborist report. He has aged those trees.
Thank you very much, ma'am, for your information. Any others? Are there other members of the public here with information for council to consider? Council, are you ready to make a decision?
Oh, we have one delegation.
Oh, yes. Well, just come up over here and please introduce yourself and share your information.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Diane Costa. I am the owner and the resident of 47 Nelson Street. My family and I have lived in Bronte for almost 40 years now. This is our current and our future home. At one time, we lived at the townhouses directly behind 47 Nelson, and we always envisioned this property as our future home. It was a dream of ours. When we bought the property from Marjorie, it was with the knowledge that this was designated as multi-residential. We had plans from the beginning to build the townhomes here. Our plan was once built that we would live in one of the units and then keep another of the units. There is no one who has more interest in keeping these trees healthy than us. It's the canopy that I look out into from my bedroom window and from my daughter's room. The trees were a great feature when we bought this property. They are magnificent maple trees, and we want to keep them that way. We have always planned to work with the town to find the best solution to keep these trees protected and to thrive for years to come. We do believe that the townhomes are the best option for this property, and there's multiple reasons for that. Most dwellings around us are either townhomes or apartment buildings. Under the zoning, we aren't allowed to build a single dwelling, and if I'm not mistaken, we're not allowed to build 2 dwellings on that property, being designated multi-residential. So the only other option, if not to do townhouses, would then be to build a multiplex where it would use the existing driveway and would look like we have across the street, would be an apartment building, which we don't want to do, never wanted to do, because this was always a plan for us to have as our home. We are using all possible resources to come up with the best solution for the driveways and to protect and to preserve these trees. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your information. Councillor O'Meara.
I have a question to follow up with staff, if that's okay. I'm wondering if you might just explain to me what a tree protection zone entails and what we're trying to protect, how far deep under the surface we need to go, and these sorts of things, and perhaps maybe what our experience is in terms of dealing with trees, town trees, and urban developments that go on. I mean, this isn't the first time we've had a development application that may impact some trees, and I think we've heard from the delegates that there are concerns with what staff have put down there, and I'm just wondering how we might sort of bridge bridge that or try and find out a little more information.
So I'll answer this through you, Mayor Burton. So the tree protection zone outlines the area that you, if everything else being equal, if you can protect that area, everything's good. If you can't fully protect that area, which is very common in Oakville and in the urban environment, that's when we often get into these investigations. Okay, so we know there's got to be some work likely inside the tree protection zone. That's where we do the air spading and the likes to expose the roots. Here we exposed the roots. We found smaller feeder roots. We didn't find large structural roots yet. Is there more exploratory work to be done? Yes. So it's quite common in the urban environment to be working in and around roots. The question with every tree that comes up is, can the amount of the roots that are going to be impacted, can the tree still survive? So in this case, their arborist has said yes. The town urban forester has agreed, but there are risks. And we didn't have full amount of time to work it out, which is why the holding provision is proposed.
So would you be confident then that when we get into the site plan issues and we get further along, and if there's an issue that comes up, then we still have the holding provision as a backup to ensure that we are protecting those trees?
Yes.
Okay, thank you, Your Worship.
Are there any other questions of staff? Council, it's time to make a decision. Councilor O'Meara.
Thank you, Your Worship. And it's not an easy one, but this is, I will be moving the staff recommendation, and I am moving the staff recommendation for the following reasons. This is the Brawny Village growth area. We went over this twice now, and the second occasion, we said, where's the province telling us to intensify, and where are we going to direct that growth to? And this was one of that areas that we designated and that we had public consultations on, and we spoke with the community, and we came to, well, not everyone agrees, we came to an understanding that this is what we had to do because our parents at the province were telling us this is what needs to happen. I do want to thank the applicant for doing what they have in terms of lowering the height, that was a question, for pushing the setback in the front yard back, for realigning the driveways, and I understand as well with the new rules, the LPAT, 150 days is short, and it's not enough time to fully deal with this. So again, I actually thank the applicant for agreeing to a holding provision on a site plan, which allows us the full control to make sure that we're happy with what we see when we dig a little deeper with a little more time. And again, just to emphasize that, the benefits of doing this through site plan still give the town control about how we allow the driveways to be developed, how the materials, the tree roots are protected. We get the benefit of doing that while ensuring that development that was planned for this area goes on like that. So I know sometimes it's not easy to trust the work that we're doing, and when you see the trees in front of you, it can get a little uneasy, but we're all in this together, and I have faith and confidence in the site plan process and in our professional staff, and I think the residents at the end of the day are going to be happy with the work that they do and overseeing this development, and with that, Your Worship, I will move the recommendation.
Thank you. Any other speakers? Shall I put the vote? All in favor? Opposed, if any, and that carries. Council, earlier I mentioned that the McLaughlin College application has been withdrawn. And as a result, we need a motion, we need someone to move this motion that I'll read, that this item no longer be considered given the application has been withdrawn by the applicant's solicitor, Mr. Neil Abbott, Gowlings, WLG, in a letter to the town clerk dated May 10th, 2019. That's moved by Councillor Giddings. May I put the vote? All in favor? And that is carried. Council, you now have the recommendation report in front of you for 79 Wilson Street, and we have a presentation from our planner, Melissa Dalrymple. Ms. Dalrymple, we are all ears, honest. I heard doors and people leaving, but they don't mean it. I'll tell you what, Council, before Ms. Dalrymple begins, I'll trade you a 5-minute bio break for a motion to go past the hour. Counselor Knoll has moved it. All those in favor? That's carried. Thank you. We will resume at 10 of. It's quarter of right now, and I hope you enjoy the break too.
Thank you.
Just trying to get your audience back.
Excuse me, I think you're speaking to 39 Leslie Street. Yes, I am. I just received this from somebody in the audience. I live in Oakville, buildings. Does this mean that the proposal has been accepted? It means that staff will do a recommendation report for council to make a decision. Oh, so I'm hoping to speak to. Yeah, they're taking a 5-minute break. Just like doing that. No problem. There's a.
Start a mass movement. I just went around the car. Everybody ran out. I know. Good.
So, Tony.
So I have something on just knitting together response to prevention and then, yeah, so I'll put that together and then send you an email letting you know culture. So. Yeah. So there's, you know, a cost. We'll also have vacation for 3 weeks. And then leave is on her injury. So she's getting back to time. So it's, yeah, it's, yeah. But it's, okay, so I know that they hired.
It's like a railroad,
You did?
And I wanted to stop this property.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, yeah, but I mean, the difference between the it's kind of, it's crazy, right? Like, the same, it's a little cost. Yeah, it's kind of crazy. Yeah, and so it was. Okay.
It's been rather interesting. All right.
All right, it's 10 of, and I'm calling the meeting back to order. And we are going to give our attention to Ms. Dalrymple, and she is going to reprise the recommendation report that you have before you, Council. Ms. Dalrymple.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and members of council. This presentation will provide a brief overview of the recommendation report for 79 Wilson Street, which can be found on page 277 of tonight's agenda. This air photo identifies the site in its context with the surrounding area. The subject lands are located on the east side of Wilson Street, north of Burnett Street, and south of Lakeshore Road West. Surrounding land uses include a 3-story apartment building and parking lot to the north and east, and detached dwellings to the south, and commercial uses to the west. The site is within the Kerr Village growth area and is designated low-density residential. The subject lands are within an identified transition area that is located south of Lakeshore Road West and north of the stable residential neighborhood to the south. Livable Oakville contains additional policies to manage change in the transition area to ensure a sensitive transition and compatibility with the residential neighborhood to the south. The site is zoned Central Business District, Special Provision 149 in the town's zoning bylaw. The application as submitted is seeking a site-specific zoning bylaw amendment to rezone the site with a new special provision to allow new semi-detached dwellings as a permitted use and to permit reductions in south side yard and landscape area. This slide shows the proposed site plan, both the original application as well as the revised application. So as a result of staff comments and input received from the public and council, the applicant revised the application, which was submitted on April 1st. The revised submission refined the layout in terms of the proposed development. However, the application remained the same in terms of use, building height, and number of units proposed. The revisions included changes to the rear yard surface parking area, which was reduced and reconfigured to accommodate landscape areas abutting the east property line and providing additional landscape area along the south property line. As well, projecting elements were removed from the north and south sides of the building. This slide shows the proposed roof plan and south elevation. So the projection of the rear yard balconies was reduced and privacy screens were added to the balconies. And as well, the mechanical mezzanine area adjacent to the rooftop terrace was reduced in area from 138 square feet to 98 square feet. And based on a more detailed review of the floor plans, the zoners determined that this area was no longer considered a 4th story for the purpose of zoning interpretation. This shows details of the proposed transition in height. So it demonstrates the transition in height between the existing apartment building to the north and the detached dwelling located south of the proposed development. With respect to implementation, a site-specific bylaw is proposed, which includes introduction of semi-detached dwellings as a permitted use and performance standards specific to the site, including building setbacks, increased building height, and reduced landscape widths. The design of this development will be further advanced through the site plan application, where items such as landscaping, architecture, and engineering details will be fully addressed. Public comments were addressed beginning on page 291 of the staff report, and a written submission was received after the statutory public meeting. That submission is included in Appendix E. This slide provides additional information in response to public delegation that we saw at the March 18th statutory public meeting, as well as the written submission. So in terms of lot coverage, no lot coverage applies on this site. The access stairs, or a concern was raised with respect to the access stairs in the front yard, and that they may lead to a basement apartment, and basement apartments aren't permitted in this zone. And as well, the recommended zoning bylaw amendment does not permit the access stairs to the basement from the front yard. Comments were raised about the edge of the rooftop terrace not being set back far enough from the edge of the roof, And the rooftop terrace does comply with the zoning bylaw setbacks for rooftop terraces. Questions were raised about the increased building height potentially causing sun shadow impacts, and the proposed 1.5 meter increase over the permitted 10.5 meters in building height would not produce any negative shadow impacts. There was also concerns raised with respect to window placement, overlook, and loss of trees, and a review of those matters will take place in detail at the site plan stage to mitigate any impacts. For reasons detailed in the staff report, staff is of the opinion the proposed zoning bylaw amendment as revised maintains the intent of the livable Oakville plan by balancing the need for growth within the Kerr Village growth area while recognizing the site's location within an identified transition area. The proposed development provides for modest intensification with an appropriate residential land use designed in a manner that's compatible with the surrounding context of the subject lands. Staff is satisfied that the application is consistent with the provincial policy statement, conforms to the growth plan and the Halton Region official plan, and that the application represents good planning. Staff put forward the following recommendation for council's consideration.
Thank you very much for your report and the concise summary of it. Council, do you have questions? Madam Clerk, are there delegations?
We have one listed delegation. It's Jane Correll.
Welcome, Ms. Coriel. Council looks
Nice to
forward
be
to your
back.
information.
Mayor, thank you very much. And first of all, I want to say compliments on the improved design that is being proposed. However, I would still like to speak against it, partly because having lived at the apartment building, 83 Wilson Street, since 1976, I have really enjoyed the views of the lake and the trees, which are going to be lost. And there are several other residents in the apartment building as well who have the same kinds of feelings. Those of you who don't know the area, it's the 3.5-story yellow brick apartment building beside the Oakville Funeral Home, just immediately south of Lakeshore and 1 block east of Kerr Street. And the proposed building wouldn't be quite as nice as what's already there, which is a nice old white wood clapboard house, which has been used as offices for a little while. And that would change the look of the neighborhood as well as the immediate look. The construction or the destruction first and then the construction, noise and dirt and dust will be appalling, of course. I know it will be finished at some point, but I would like to speak as part of my speaking against the whole thing. The size and scale of the building would, if I didn't mention it before, would add to a kind of sense of crowdedness on the street, I think, rather than just this house that is simply there. The use of the shared driveway could be another concern, and parking and that kind of thing could be another concern as well. And that's what I have to say, basically, that most of us in the apartment building are still opposed to this new structure. Thank you for your patience.
Thank you for your information. Are there other delegations? Are there other members of the public here with information for council on this file? Welcome. Please introduce yourself for the clerk and share your information with us.
Good evening, Mayor and councillors. My name is Sandra Boardman. I work with DQI, who are the agents on behalf of the owners of 79 Wilson Street. And I just want to speak to just the a few items that were raised by the neighbour, Jane, at Snow Manor. One is probably to do with the shared driveway, which in fact, because of this development, the number of cars that will be utilising the driveway. At the moment, there are 7 small office businesses operating in the existing building. So the reduction in the number of cars by 2 semi-detached units with possibly 2 vehicles per unit and will be a substantial reduction. The size and scale we've dealt with working with town staff in terms of kind of something that will fit and be appropriate for the neighbourhood as well. And as explained by staff as well, we've made various, we've redesigned various elements of the building in order to keep within the zoning bylaws. So that's everything. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your information. Anyone else? All right, I'll confine it to table. Councillor Chisholm.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'd like to speak to the motion, but first of all, I was very impressed with the owners on this development. They took pride and took a real concern about the community and what they were building in that area. It is a challenge because it is a transition area, knowing full well it is in a stable residential neighborhood, but looking at the designs and looking at the due diligence was provided by the owners, I feel very comfortable with this. However, notwithstanding, when we get the site plan with respect to the design of landscaping and trees and so forth, I'm welcoming that to come to site plan for further discussion. And I invite Jane to come to a site plan meeting when it comes forward, so we have some good dialogue with respect to what happens on the design part. So I'd like to move the motion to accept the report.
Thank you. Councillor Chisholm moves the staff recommendation. Other discussion? May I put the vote? All in favor? Opposed, if any, and that is carried. Item number 8 is the recommendation report for the zoning bylaw amendment for 240 Leland Avenue. This is the PetSmart item on which Councillor O'Meara has declared an interest, and as a result, he will be shoving back and not participating in this matter. If we give our attention now to Heinz Hecht, our manager of current planning, we can have a reprise of the report that we've all studied, but this is for the benefit of the public. So, Mr. Hecht, we and the public are all ears.
Thank you. Thank you, Your Worship and members of council. Item 8 is a recommendation report regarding a proposed zoning amendment submitted by RioCan, the Oakville Place Mall. The effect of the zoning bylaw would be to permit a pet daycare use and pet training in conjunction with a pet retail store. The air photo showing the location is before you. Just in terms of background, since the last time the report was before council, a statutory public meeting was held on April 15th, 2019. The issues that were raised at the meeting included concerns regarding the overnight boarding of pets, the appropriateness of providing a suitable outdoor amenity area as required by the town's licensing bylaw. The proposal has now been revised to remove the overnight boarding and therefore not require an outdoor area for the pets. The effect of the proposal would be to permit a pet daycare facility as part of the pet retail store. Just in terms of the official plan, the livable Oakville plan identifies the Oakville Place Mall as a core commercial land use designation, which would permit a wide range of retail and commercial uses, including a pet retail store. The zoning bylaw currently zones the lands C3 core commercial, which is in conformity with the official plan today. Just in terms of the conclusion, Your Worship, the staff report recommends approval of the proposed zoning amendment as revised. The proposed zoning bylaw conforms with the livable Oakville plan and is appropriate for the use of the lands. And that concludes my presentation, Your Worship.
Thank you very much for the presentation, Mr. Hecht. Are there registered delegations on this? Are there members of the public with information for council on this matter? Council, do you have questions? It may be time to make a decision. Councillor Grant.
Given the work that's been put into this, I'll move the staff recommendation.
Thank you, Councillor Grant. Is there discussion? May I put the vote? All those in favor? Opposed, if any? That is carried. Next up, we have the Committee of Adjustment 2018 Annual Activity Report and a presentation from Timothy Lee, the Manager of Zoning and Committee of Adjustment. And Council, for those of you who haven't met Mr. Lee before, this is your chance to get to know him a bit.
Good evening, Mayor Barron and members of council. My name is Tim Lee. I'm the manager of Zoning and Community Adjustment. I'm just here tonight to give you just a brief presentation on the Community Adjustment Annual Activity for 2018. So to provide you with some background information on the work that Planning and Building Services have done, in late 2014, staff commenced a review of the Community Adjustment process. And in 2016, a number of process and service improvements were implemented. This resulted in improved service delivery, renewed connectivity between the community, town, staff, and community members, and also provided the ability for staff to collect higher quality data through our Amanda system for reporting purposes. So with respect to annual community adjustment application volumes, as you can see in these bar charts, in 2016 and 2017, the volume of applications remained pretty consistent, with a total of 228 applications in 2016 and a total of 218 applications in 2017. However, in 2018, there was a decrease in applications by approximately 21%. The potential reasons for the decline in applications could be the downturn in the economy and the proactive role that staff are performing prior to the application submission. So in terms of application types, over the past 3 years, approximately 85% of the minor variance applications received were for residential applications. Majority of them located in South Oakville in wards 1, 2, and 3, and for detached dwellings. So since the data enhancement project was implemented in 2016, staff are able to obtain higher quality data for minor variance applications. As an example, this table shows top residential variances requested, which have generally decreased in 2018 in relation to previous years. This could be a result of the continued interaction between applicants and staff, including our pre-consultation service to discuss the merits of an application prior to submission. So as you are aware, the Community Adjustment is a statutory and independent decision-making group. Although the committee members and staff apply the same criteria established under the Planning Act, when evaluating applications, members and staff may not always agree or share the same viewpoints. In some cases, additional information may be presented at the hearing by applicants or the public, which staff would have not had the chance to consider. So this table illustrates the number of applications where the committee and staff had a difference of opinion. The percentage of applications where the committee and staff had a difference of opinion has decreased from 18% in 2016 to 3% in 2018. So the number of applications appealed to LPAT has decreased from previous years, as shown in this table. During the appeal process, there are often settlement discussions which involve extensive negotiations between the applicant and the staff that often result in a settlement. As applicants are now understanding the time, cost, and effort involved in the town-initiated appeals, it appears applicants are considering more reasonable variance requests, or they choose to build in accordance with the zoning bylaw. This perhaps is contributing to the decrease in number of appeals and the overall number of applications submitted. So in conclusion, since 2016, staff have implemented a number of process and service improvements for the betterment of the town, the public, and the committee members. To maintain our high quality of customer service, staff will continue to review and monitor the community adjustment process and seek enhancements wherever possible.
Thank you. I'd like to compliment planning staff on the way the discussion that takes place after a disagreement with the committee seems to often it hasn't happened very much where you've been out of step with each other, but what's been interesting to me is the way staff, on consideration of the committee's point of view, have 2 or 3 times in the recent past, I've noticed staff then agree that the committee has added value to the process. And so I think that's an argument for keeping everybody engaged and keeping all parts of the system going. I see a hand over here, Councillor Elger.
Yeah, thank you very much for the presentation. It's nice to see we're going in the right direction. Just if you could go back one slide, just a couple things. At the very bottom, you got your application appeals by the town is 2. Do you mean the total should be 8 instead of 6? Like normally 6 and 2 gives 8, not 6?
No, through you, Mayor Burton, the appeals filed by the town, are you talking about 2018?
Yeah.
Appeals filed by the town is 2 of them, but there could be possibly multiple appeals on one application. So appeals filed by a third party, there could be 6. And the number of applications appealed was like a total of 6, but there might have been multiple appeals on one application.
Okay, because I noticed everything else where you had 10 and 12, you get 22, you had 15 and 6, you get 21, but when you add 2 and 6, you still get 6.
Yes.
That's okay?
Yes.
That is legit?
Yes, it is
Wow,
legit.
that's
because
interesting.
there's multiple appeals in one application.
Okay. Now, the 2 appeals that the town appealed, from what I read in the next page, we won that. Like, we won those cases. Can you tell me just roughly what those 2 cases were? Those are interesting ones, and they sound like good ones.
Councillor, I see that Mr. Perlin is here. He might be happy to chat with you after the meeting and give you the blow-by-blow on each of them.
Well, that'd be, and going forward, when we get another report, if maybe they could be put in the report, it'd be helpful also. That would be fine.
Through you, Mayor Burton, we considered putting it in the report, but the thing is that it talks about specific properties, and I think it was appropriate to talk about specific properties in the report for the appeals.
Oh, okay, well, I'm not sure, why would that be? I'm just curious, why would that be not a public information?
I think there could be some, I would ask, our Dennis Perlin about that, but there might be some kind of confidentiality. I don't know off the top of my head.
Oh, that'd be good to know. Does Mr. Perlin have the answer?
Why don't we start with the town solicitor?
Sure.
Mr. Carr, what kind of light can you shed on this? I mean, these cases can be looked up. They're published,
correct,
right?
Your Worship. I don't think that it's particularly a matter of great secrecy or personal information to refer to an address that's subject to a public process. We were just discussing whether or not we might be able to accommodate that information in future reports.
Oh, okay, I appreciate that. I thank you.
So, I mean, it is a plain fact that all OMB cases are published. Now, they don't list addresses and telephone numbers and stuff like that. They just list the names of the parties. So I grant there could be a little bit of weeding that needs to be done before we discuss them, but surely we can discuss them. All right. Are there other questions? Councillor Hazlet-Thiel.
Thank you very much for the report. In about the past 18 months, the staff reports that have been commenting on the applications have referenced averaging or a comparison of the neighborhood. Do you think that that's had an impact on the number of appeals or the decision-making process at the committee?
Through your worship, I'll answer that question to the councillor. So yes, I do believe it's had an impact. It's provided staff a consistent way to approach the applications, one that the neighborhoods seem to respond to and understand and anticipate. I also note that the committee is looking for that from us as well. So I do believe that's been a good approach, and I think it's having a positive impact.
Okay, thank you. A second question. I noticed that you, and I concur with Mayor Burton, that There have been some new information that comes forward at the Committee of Adjustment that changes the staff's perspective on whether the application should be approved. Is there anything we can do in the process that eliminates or reduces the number of surprises? Because residents go through a great deal of effort to consider, and it's actually quite a scramble to get organized to speak to their objection to a variance request, and then new information that's not in the staff report is brought forward. Is there anything we can do in the process to eliminate that, those surprises?
There's always, through you, Mayor Burton, there's always something we can do. We're very sensitive to the amount of involvement the community has in these processes, and we'd be happy to look into that specifically. Brandon Hassan, who's our new Committee of Adjustment Planner, is in the audience tonight. We speak regularly in these matters, and there's great dialogue, a lot of energy put into the files, but sometimes something gets there at the meeting that we're unaware of. And in order for to be fair to the applicant and to the process, we've allowed Brandon to make decisions at the meetings that reflect the reality of what he's hearing. Now, there's always an opportunity for somebody to ask for a deferral, if that's in order, for people to internalize and understand the new information. So that could potentially be one new part of our process that we may consider.
Okay. So thank you for those comments. I would concur that Brandon does an exceptional job and is a terrific communicator. I just, most residents struggle with the concept of deferral and the intensity of the process. So I'm not sure what we will do, but I would just encourage us to look for opportunities for them to either understand they can defer or to reduce the amount of new information.
Councillor Giddings.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Further to your comments earlier, I couldn't agree more that the procedure is working. It appears applicants are considering more reasonable variance requests or choose to build in accordance with the zoning bylaw. Quite the understatement there. I think the numbers and the questions from people, the reduction, have certainly shown that. My question is whether there's a reduced number of questions or time at the counter than perhaps previously, and is there a reduction in staff time that we've seen from that? Because the number is incredibly reduced.
Through your worship to the councillor, staff time is measured in a number of ways. There's a lot of involvement from staff, not only in planning, but also in building services. We bring in a large percentage of our staff on a weekly basis. Even if the agendas have become smaller, we still take time to go out and do the site inspections. Sometimes it's more than once if there's a disagreement or misunderstanding with staff. Urban designers might see something that the policy planners hadn't considered, and they go again and further investigate it. This all takes time. So it's not like there's a over an abundance. We still have to review the appeals, and there's just generally a lot of work associated. There's certainly a lot of counter inquiries.
Thank you very much. I'm not at all surprised based on the amount of time we spend with your staff on a regular basis.
Thank you, Mr. Lee. Thank you. Council, it's time to make a decision. It's a big decision. Somebody has to move receipt of the information. Councillor Dudek, thank you. All in favor? And that is received. Thank you, everybody. Item number 10 is the 2019 update on the Committee of Adjustment appeal process procedure. And this gives us a chance to hear from Mr. Dennis Perlin.
As he races to the podium.
Don't look so eager.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of council. The report speaks for itself.
I love that presentation.
Thank you very much. I was asked to just highlight some of the main points. This is an update. The procedure that has been adopted by council in 2013 is mandatorily required to be updated every 5 years. So this is the 5-year update of that 2013 procedure. What it does do in the procedure, it sets out, we hope, a more clear enunciation of the standing instructions on the 9 usual situations that council, on which there may be some appeal involvement either by the town itself or by third parties or the applicant. It does provide some change in the process of allowing for one less email to councillors who are planning requests an appeal. Before we were doing one to the planning department, then one to the councillors, even though the planning department was already recommending appeal. There is, in the area of settlement, we've clarified that there shouldn't be settlements unless the mayor and ward councillors have been informed of the proposed settlement. We've had some occasion in the past, rare as it was, where that didn't occur and caused some misunderstanding. The one exception might be when we're at a hearing and the time does not permit us to do the consultation before, but we are mandated by the procedure now to make sure we do inform the mayor and ward councillors afterwards of what settlement was reached. The criteria that were in the original 2013 procedure were set out in that procedure to actually be the basis for the appeal itself. That has changed and become, the criteria haven't changed, but they are the criteria the council is to put its mind to when considering whether to confirm or refuse the continuation of the appeal. One of the methods of achieving settlement in a timely way has been that the a second committee of adjustment application, sometimes LPAT is not able to schedule appeals in a manner on settled situations is as quickly as an applicant may like. So what has been permitted is the applicant to make a second committee of adjustment application based on the settled situation. They agree to then allow the appeal on the first one and have it dismissed. And what has been happening is the second application fee has been reimbursed. Under the procedure adopted by council, that would not occur. Instead, there would be a reduced second application fee to reflect what should be a lesser effort in terms of some of the aspects of the application. The council not being asked tonight to address that, the actual amount that would be done in the rates and fees and would come forward separately, but just the principle of a second application fee reduced, but no reimbursement of the first application fee. And then the standing instructions do, as I said, in the 9 situations, set out when reports will come to council and when they need not come to council because the matter is very clear in its face. So those are the changes to the standing instructions that are proposed.
Thank you, Mr. Perlin. I have to say that not only has the changes that we just discussed gotten a better result for the community, but so has this appeal process worked. This has worked a charm, and I'm confident that your proposals will make it even better. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr.
Councillor Duddick is moving the proposal that the Committee of Adjustment Appeals procedure be repealed and replaced with the procedure set out in Appendix D to the report of the Legal Department dated April 30th, 2019. Councillor Haswell-Thiel.
So I just have some questions of staff. So on page 332 of the report, it does, it states that the change does mean, however, that should there be a concern with any other applications or decisions by the committee, the mayor or the councillor on receipt of the notice will need to contact the legal department. The earlier paragraph says we will be contacted if an appeal is going to be, I'm just wondering, am I just tired and taking too much cold medicine, or are they contradictory?
No. Where planning is not recommending an appeal, notwithstanding that the committee decision is contrary to advice, then in that case, that is directed to the mayor and ward councils in terms of why the planners, and I think the mayor addressed that previously in discussion on the previous report, why there isn't an automatic appeal. And what I'm addressing on those, normally, if the approach has been that that the committee of adjustment, if it does its decision is in keeping with the planning advice, then there would be no appeal. In the past, what I was doing early on was doing a report to each of the ward councilors and the mayor on all of the particular applications in every ward. That would not be continued under the present procedure because every member of council does get the Committee of Adjustment decisions and has an opportunity to review them. There may be some decisions that the committee has approved that staff have recommended that the mayor or ward councilors or other councilors may find difficulty with for reasons not identified by planning staff or by the committee. In those situations, then it would be, the procedure would be such that the councilor concerned or the mayor should contact the town solicitor and ask that an appeal be launched. As you know, that still brings it to council at a later date for confirmation or withdrawal. But I won't be doing a report that sets out any of the other applications that, are already recommended by planning staff and approved by the committee. So if there's ones that are otherwise, then you should contact me, and then the appeal would be filed.
Okay. Thank you for clarifying that for me. I have one other question of staff. So it talks in the report about the town would no longer take the lead if we do not support the appeal. And I'm wondering if our minds have turned to any resources or tools that could be provided to a resident, because it's one thing for us to take the position that we choose not to appeal it doesn't have broad implications for the town. But we know as a fact our residents struggle with not only just the Committee of Adjustment, but now the OMB. So I'm wondering if efforts could be made not to just wash our hands of it, but to give them some sort of tool. I'm not saying people resource, but a tool to support them if they choose to take on the OMB.
Through your worship, I'll answer that one for the councillor. Yes, we could look at that. We were successful about 3 years ago with our guide to the Committee of Adjustment. I think that's the model that you might be thinking about. I also understand that there's no longer support for the LPAT process. There had been, that would pulled away early on in the new government at the province. I think it's probably appropriate for us to have a look at that and come back to you with some options. Be happy to do that.
Thanks very much.
All right, may I put the vote? All those in favor? Opposed, if any? Thank you, everybody. On item number 11, 2460 Old Brawny Road, the replacement of the Heritage Easement Agreement, we have a presentation available from Sue Shappert. It is a pretty self-explanatory item. Is there a desire to have the presentation? Is there a motion?
I'll move the staff recommendation.
Councillor Elgar has moved the staff recommendation. All those in favor? Opposed, if any? And that is carried. Thank you, Councillor Elgar. Number 12 is the discussion paper on Integrated Growth Management Strategy Regional Official Plan Review, and that item needs to be deferred, and the Director of Planning Services has requested that we defer that. Can I have a motion to defer that? Councillor Chisholm, thank you. All those in favor? And that is deferred. For item number 13, we have the information report, modernizing conservation authorities and focusing conservation authority development permits on the protection of people and property Conservation Authorities Act and regulation. And we have a presentation from Kirk Bigger, our senior planner, and I won't editorialize, but I think this is something we should pay attention to, and it supports a little action later. Mr. Bigger?
Thank you, Mayor Burton.
I won't say we look forward to the bad news, but we do look forward to your report.
Thank you. Just pulled the slides up here. Thank you. Here we go. Thank you, Mayor Burton, members of council, good evening. I have some opening remarks that relate to the next two items, 13 and 14 on the agenda. And it has to do with the notation in the report that there were items to be distributed at the meeting. So as of this evening, those items to be distributed were not available to be distributed. They are, in fact, what we call a joint submission from the HAP group, which is, I'll explain briefly, the Halton Area Planning Partnership. And that is a group that collaborates on policy matters. Lately, we've been responding to provincial initiatives through the HAP group. And the membership of that group consists of the local municipalities, the town of Oakville, Milton, Burlington, Halton Hills, as well the region of Halton. And also HAP includes the conservation authorities within Halton region, which include Credit Valley Conservation, Halton Conservation, or Conservation Halton rather, and the Grand River Valley Conservation Authority. And so as you might well appreciate, it takes some time to bring these collaborative efforts forward, and it is nearly authorized by all the members of HAP, but not quite. So that's where we are today. I guess perhaps it's a reflection of the tight timelines that we're attempting to respond to as well these days. However, even if those HAP joint submissions are not approved, the reports before you this evening would stand as the town's opinion and as the town's comments to the province, and so those could carry forward. But also want you to just be reassured that when those joint submissions are completed, staff will receive them and review them, and if there's information in there that causes us to want to revisit that recommendation, we bring a report forward. But I think it's more of a timing issue, not a content issue that we're dealing with on these joint submissions. And with that, I will begin my presentation. As the introductory slide mentions, it's an information report on proposed changes to the Conservation Act and Conservation Authorities Act and their regulation. So these are two postings to the Environmental Registry of Ontario, and the reports can be found in the addendum agenda, this one beginning on page 17. I'm going to be discussing briefly some background to the matter, a quick overview of the proposed changes, a review of the content of the HAP joint submissions. So we have been working with draft material along the way to prepare this report, and then the recommendation that's before you this evening. This particular initiative is following up on proposed changes that were previewed through the new provincial government's environment plan, a Made for Ontario environment plan. So it's just following through on that. And it's actually the end of a fairly substantial process that the province has undertaken over a number of years. So the Conservation Authorities Act has been under review since 2015, and the town has participated at first individually with direct comments to the province, and then collaboratively through participation in the Halton Area Planning Partnership. And on April 5th of this year, the province posted 2 new notices proposing changes, as I mentioned, to the Conservation Authorities Act and the regulations for development permits. In response, HAP has been preparing a joint submission, which is presented in part in the report. This is from the provincial website, really just an overview of what the proposed changes are intending to accomplish. The province has stated that the proposed amendments to the Conservation Authorities Act would help CAs to focus and deliver on their core mandate and to improve governance. With respect to the proposed regulation, it outlines how conservation authorities permit development and other activities for impacts to natural hazards and public safety. It will also make the rules for development in hazardous areas more consistent to support faster, more predictable, and less costly approvals. So that's the provincial intent for these changes. With respect to HAP and the joint submission, generally HAP, as is this council and as is this municipality, is supportive of changes that are dealing with clarification and scoping of responsibility and assigning clear roles to participants in a process. So at a general level, HAP is also supportive of those goals. And in response to our relationship here in Halton, the partners at the HAP table have been working on a memorandum of understanding, and that's something that we revisit regularly. It has input from all the partners, and it again helps to identify who does what, where, and when in terms of how we work together as agencies on this landscape of planning. And we feel that the work done on the MOU and the additional work to be done to continue to refine that would be consistent with the province's intent to propose these changes, or what they're hoping to achieve through these changes to the Act and to the regulation. However, there are also some concerns with the process, and this won't be the first time, or excuse me, the last time that you hear these types of remarks, but things are moving rather quickly. And so, and it doesn't seem that there's a sufficient amount of time to gather meaningful input into the process that the province is undertaking. So a standard recommendation here is to request a longer time frame for commenting. And the main reason for that, currently we're dealing with 30-day time frames. The time frames for submitting comments on these two proposed changes are May 20th and May 21st, which is why we're here tonight, to try and work those comments up and provide them to the province within their commenting period, which is a 30-day window. We're suggesting that a 60-day window would be more appropriate, which would give us time to report to council, receive considered input from council, and send that back up to the province as a more meaningful form of engagement. We're also seeing that in terms of the details that are being released, that there aren't sufficient details to make a comprehensive comment to the province on what they're intending to achieve. So certain details are missing, and so the recommendation, the request through HAP and through town staff would be that those details are provided in full to the public so that a review and those comments can be done more comprehensively. There's an area around consistency versus flexibility. This Conservation Authorities Act itself was written to be flexible, to be a general template that could be then used at a more local level or at the more watershed level to from what a conservation authority might be involved in to reflect local conditions. And so the recommendation from HAP again and from town staff would be that in the future that these changes would still protect that flexibility. Watershed conditions vary across the landscape, and what regulations and what activities a conservation authority engages in need to be able to reflect those local conditions. So each watershed is different, and the policies need to reflect that. So those are my remarks on this item this evening, the recommendation before you. It's a bit shortened just to fit it all on one page, but it is consistent with the first page of the report. And that would be to receive the report and then to submit it to the Ministry of Environment, Conservation and Parks by May 20th, and the Ministry of Natural Resources and Forestry by May 21st, and that this report be forwarded to our HAP partners. And I'll take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Elgar has one for you at least.
Just quick, at the very beginning, you mentioned faster, consistent, and you used the word approvals. It doesn't say analysis or detailed analysis or anything, just to get to the approval. Do you think they made a mistake in that, or that's exactly what they want, just faster approvals?
I believe that the work that conservation authorities would do under the development permit system would involve a considerable amount of analysis. But through these proposed changes, it's attempting to scope down the area where a conservation authority would be active. So just confining that to hazards and perhaps not perhaps those conservation authorities wouldn't be involved in other areas of land use development. So that could shorten up the approval process because they wouldn't be working in as many places or in as many areas as an agency.
Yeah, it scares me when when you read out faster, consistent, and the word approvals kind of says where we're going forward right now. So thank you for what you're trying to do. It's like pushing with a rope right now, I think.
So, you know, the public and we should all consider how would it sound if the word approvals in that sentence had been, if the province had chosen the word decisions? And because an approval is a decision, and decisions include approvals and rejections. So we're sort of being told, just approve stuff, it sounds like. And when you look at Bill 108, you get the same feeling. It starts multiplying on you that our job is just say yes. Councillor Adams had a hand up.
Thank you very much for the report, and I agree quite wholeheartedly with the issues, especially around the timing and how quick we're supposed to be responding to these comments and providing submissions. Last Friday, Credit Valley Conservation had its board meeting, and we were desperately trying to figure out how to provide comments in a timely enough way back to the province on all these changes, and to the point where we determined that we had to delegate stuff to the chair and vice chair and our CAO in order to be able just to meet their timelines. And so, you know, that's not really the best way of providing comments in my opinion, and that's not really my question, but my question is, through the HAP process, was there time to be able to obtain the comments that were generated in letter form from Credit Valley for consideration? And I presume the same kind of thing was happening through Conservation Halton. I know that Conservation Ontario has been having a hard time being able to respond adequately to the timeframes in all these consultations.
Through you, Mr. Chair. Yes, Councillor, the content generated by all the agencies and in all the various ways that they've been trying to respond and responding to the province has been incorporated into the HAP submission.
Okay.
So the same staff that are producing those documents, those letters to their boards, are also providing that input to this work. And that you would see reflected in the HAP joint submission. Often we attach detailed comments on specific aspects of proposed changes. So all that information and all that good work by the agencies is reflected there.
So so we're having trouble with the ERO posting deadlines that we're also having trouble with here, and at the same time having trouble with trying to understand how those postings related to the Bill 108 changes that are already enacting stuff that they're supposed to be consulting with originally. And, you know, which are you supposed to respond to, and is it worth responding to something that they're already putting into a bill? Do you know, where's the value in this consultation that's, you know, already passed and no use?
Well, I would say, through you, Mr. Chair, that the next item, for example, the endangered species item, has a general description on the ERO posting of what the government intends to do through changes. And then hot on the heels of that, within the commenting window, Bill 108 came out with proposed amendments to that act. So your point is, where do we put our comments? I think we are here in Oakville putting our comments at every opportunity that we can.
We're doing both.
We're doing both, absolutely. Yeah. And seeing the Bill 108, for example, again with the Endangered Species Act, gave us a better idea of where things were going. So there was a general description, and then we were able to dive a little bit deeper into the details with the proposed amendments to that act to really understand what was happening. So as things are revealed, we comment, and every opportunity to comment, I think we would be advised to take.
Thank you very much for your feedback about the kind of work that you're trying to do behind the scenes to gather all these comments and get them in on time. Your worship, this is exactly the kind of thing that's frustrating so many organizations, trying to deal with the constant turmoil of who's doing what, when, and where.
Yeah. Council, on that note, on this matter, on the endangered species matter, which is next, and also on the Bill 108 matter, I learned today, really good news, Environmental Defense Canada has decided that these things they go too far, and they're going to run a Bill 66 style campaign to try to turn some of this back, to try to make some ground, as they did on the Bill 66, by getting Schedule 10 out of Bill 66. And I would ask, and because I was involved in that Bill 66 campaign with EDC, I know how hard it is to get that going, and I would like to ask you to add a couple of things to this recommendation, but they really, and it's not just for this. At the next one, I'd ask that we also add, you know, in recitation 3, where we talk about who we send it to, I'd like it also sent to Environmental Defense Canada, both this one, and I'll say it again for the next one. But I'd also like to add point 4, with your approval, that we add $25,000 to the budget of the Office of Mayor and Council from our reserves to assist us in helping Environmental Defense Canada have a successful campaign against these things. And so I'll just look to you, Councillor, to see if anyone would like to make that motion.
I'd be pleased to.
Thank you, Councillor Elgar. May I put the vote? All those in favor? And that's carried. The next item of news is the information report, the 10th year review of Ontario's Endangered Species Act. Many of us were at a speech by the Minister of Finance, who had a few choice words to say about what he thought about protecting endangered species. And I'll stop there, but Mr. Bigger, give us a sense of the news here.
There we go. Got it. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and again, members of council, for listening. This is the second report commenting on the province's initiatives, this time dealing with proposed changes to the Endangered Species Act. It is in your addendum agenda, page 25, item number 14, and my earlier remarks about the HAP joint submission apply here as well. I took the liberty of trying to color up these slides a little bit because there aren't a lot of pictures that go along with sort of provincial initiatives, but you'll see I've profiled some endangered species from our town and our part of the world, just as a way of trying to illustrate the slides a little bit better. The overview is similar to the last one. We'll talk about the background, some proposed changes, a review of the content of the joint submission, some town comments, which we had an opportunity to think a little bit more on and be a little bit more pointed on, and again, the recommendation. So this is happening quickly. A review was initiated in 2019, and the changes being proposed were posted to the Environmental Registry of Ontario, the ERO, and through Bill 108 shortly after. The ERO posting is open for 30 days, closing May 18th. Again, I think that's Saturday. And then Bill 108 passed first reading in May 2nd. So again, back to those earlier remarks, a first reading is not a last reading. It's not royal assent. There's still opportunities to provide input through those readings and through those hearings to perhaps modify the proposal. I learned a lot about the Endangered Species Act putting this report together. I hope the report, before you summarizes that, I'll get into a little bit about what it does. It essentially protects species at risk and their habitats. It also promotes the recovery of those species and stewardship activities to protect, to assist in the protection and the recovery of those species. There's a whole process involved, again, detailed in the report with lots of great big acronyms, which we love. But it's a system that works to help balance out those interests of those species that are found in our landscape where we're developing and where we're growing. So again, from the province's website, they're stating the intent of the changes to the Endangered Species Act is to improve outcomes for species at risk by implementing recommendations received to modernize and improve the effectiveness of the Act and improve outcomes for species at risk. Those are province's words. We summarize some of these proposed changes briefly in some of the following statements. Again, the report details it a little bit further. But the minister has the power now to extend the timelines for when a species is classified and then possibly added to the species at risk Ontario list. So this is dealing with an understanding of what a species needs and what it may be losing on the landscape and how then it would go onto a protected status on the list. There's also a proposal to look at a species, consider a species risk at a broader scale, perhaps even outside of Ontario, and where that risk assessment is perhaps lower, you could apply that risk here. So if something's really threatened here and not so threatened somewhere else, it might have that not so threatened status, and those are kind of my technical terms for it. And then finally, the legislation would provide an opportunity for the minister to have agreements that would permit, essentially the legislation talks about killing a species or destroying its habitat. Those are the words out of the legislation. And you could do that as well as banking land elsewhere to provide for the protection of that species. So it could be lost in one location, but land could be provided in another location. That's a conservation banking concept to protect that species. And then there's also another proposed change that would permit a payment of a charge for the destruction of habitat or killing of a species. So that would go into a fund that could be used for conservation and other purposes. Again, similar to previous remarks, those sorts of details haven't been made available to us, but the idea of a fund is what's been proposed so far through the legislative changes. Generally, the HAP submission, dealing with similar comments as before, the 60-day time frame would allow for more considered engagement with council and the community on these matters. There's a remark there, some detail from HAP about how the existing Endangered Species Act works pretty well, and perhaps efficiencies and these sorts of intentions by the province could be found by working with the Act a little bit better in its current form and linking that to the land use planning process a little more clearly, which we all know and we all work with quite well here. Again, the proposed changes are vague. It's not clear, as I mentioned earlier with an example of the Conservation Trust, how much, who would collect it, how it would be paid out. Those sorts of details haven't been revealed. And so those should be brought forward for engagement as well. Transition and timing, the remark there is that the responsibility for the Endangered Species Act is being transferred administratively from one ministry to another. So it used to be with Natural Resources and Forestry, and now it's with Environment, Conservation, and Parks. With that transition just happening, the advice from HAP and from staff here is that maybe these changes to the Act could be postponed or deferred until the new ministry has an opportunity to gain a better understanding of how the Act works, and then changes could flow out of that experience that they would gain from operating with the Act for a period of time. And then finally, HAP is recommending, as is staff, that should those proposed changes to the Endangered Species Act be approved, that they be accompanied by guidelines and implementation documents to help municipalities and other agencies implement those new requirements under the Act. So here we get into a bit more commentary around the town's concerns that we've identified. There's a piece in the report that gets into our work with biodiversity locally and also identifies areas where the province has been active in terms of biodiversity. I don't go into those comments here, but I try and make the link. The Endangered Species Act is a really important piece of legislation to help protect biodiversity, and at the town that's recognized in the work that we do. And so that link seems to be severed some by these proposed changes, and that we're losing one of our important tools for protecting biodiversity. So I'll just I'll leave that comment out there. It's in the report as well. So again, with all of these initiatives, the town is generally supportive of changes that would improve outcomes for species. But when you start to read into what these proposed changes are envisioning, again, as I mentioned, the link between protecting biodiversity seems to be fading some. And staff are of the opinion that biodiversity is important. Protecting biodiversity and having strong biodiversity protection is important for the health and wellness of the community, as well for those species that are involved. And finally, there's a concern that the legislation that's intended to protect species would be undermined through these proposed changes, and that staff are concerned that it might have the opposite intended effect, and that species would be less protected under these proposed changes. So that's a summary of the report and the remarks in the report and the concerns identified, and the recommendation, again, shortened some to fit on the screen, but consistent with the front page of the report, and that's to receive, to submit to the Ministry of Environment, Conservation and Parks, and then to circulate, as is our custom, to our HAP partners.
Thank you, Mr. Bigger. Before we begin, I have to say, listening to the report, the claim as to what it's going to do versus the changes that are described means that the title, it's Orwellian. It's doublespeak. And this act ought to be called Pay to Slay. But I won't go further, or you'll know what I really think. Councillor, are there questions? Councillor Elgar.
Just to you, Mayor Burton, do you think we need more than 25,000 approved to help out here?
We might. This is like an onslaught on everything we've been trying to do for the last 12 years. All right, so could I get a motion that would add EDC to the distribution list? Councillor Longo, thank you. All those in favor, thank you. That's carried. It is late, isn't it? It's a good thing we went past the hour, but we may not have gone far enough. Let's see here. Item number 50, we have like 2 minutes to do only one item here.
We passed a motion to go past.
Pardon?
We've already passed a motion.
I know, but it only went to 10, doesn't it?
No, 10:30.
Oh, 10:30, right,
Yes,
okay.
lots of time.
Oh, well, then we're made in the shade. We'll be good. So the advisory committee minutes are next. The Heritage Oakville Advisory Committee, I apologize for the time I just wasted, that the following recommendation pertaining to item 6B of the Heritage Oakville Advisory Committee minutes from its meeting on April 23rd be approved and the remainder of the minutes be received. And the rest of the report here, the details are here for you. Council, how do you propose? Councillor Giddings, you're moving the recommendation. May I put the vote?
Sue Shepherd may have a different motion.
Oh, Ms. Shepherd, do you have any changes before we adopt your first version?
I'm sorry, Madam Clerk, do you happen to have copies of those with you this evening? Excellent. Just to thank you, Mr. Mayor and members of council, to be very brief. We are proposing a minor change to the last part of the motion in order to provide the applicants with additional flexibility in terms of extending the timeline. Sorry, it's under the proposed revision, it would be C that we're looking at. And so the applicants have requested additional time on top of the 4-year heritage permit approval. Normally, that's not something that we like to do because we feel that if you go outside that timeline, there's a greater risk of having policies change. What we've tried to encapsulate in this revised recommendation is the ability for the applicants to extend their heritage permit approval, providing that there are no significant changes to the regulations that are listed there in 1C, which deals with our concerns, because if there are significant changes that impact this application, it would mean that the application would have to come back to council. However, if there are no changes to those regulations or policies, they are able to extend their heritage permit application for an additional 4 years. I'm happy to answer any questions you might have.
All right, questions? Councillor Giddings, do you still maintain your motion? As amended. Thank you. May I put the vote? All in favor? Opposed, if any? And that is carried. Thank you, Ms. Shepherd. I think I'm at the point where I can ask for a motion to rise and report. Who would like to give us a motion to rise and report? Councillor Sandhu, thank you. All those in favor? Oh, Councillor Chisholm.
No, we dealt with that. We dealt with that. I must have missed that.
Beginning.
The beginning.
I can tell wasn't away.
Always included in the consent item.
Yes, yes.
It's okay. It's been that kind of night. So Councillor Sandhu has moved rise and report. May I put the vote? All those in favor? That's carried, and thank you. I rise and report the Committee of the Whole has met and made recommendations on consent items 1, 2, and 16, public hearing items 3 and 4, discussion items 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, and 14, and advisory committee minutes item 15, as noted by the clerk. We need a mover and seconder for the report. Councillor Palmer and Councillor Knoll. All those in favor? Opposed, if any? The report is adopted. Thank you. Under new business, Council, I'm asking you, we need a motion to waive procedure that in accordance with Section 2, Sub 2 of the Procedure Bylaw, the rules of procedure established in Section 14.1.1 and 14.1.2 be waived to permit A, a notice of motion to be introduced at the Planning and Development Council meeting this evening, and B, to deal with the notice of motion this evening. And Councillor Egger, would you like to be the mover of this part?
Sure.
Thank you, and can I have a seconder? Councillor Adams, all those in favor? And that is carried. And then we have Bill 108, moved by Councillor Knoll and seconded by Councillor Elgar. Councillor Knoll, would you like to read this for the public and speak to it? It has a certain amount of importance here.
Surely. Thank you, Your Worship. So I'll read the motion first of all. Whereas the legislation that abolished the OMB and replaced it with the LPAT received unanimous all-party support. Whereas all parties recognize that local governments should have the authority to uphold their provincially approved official plans to uphold their community-driven planning. Whereas Bill 108 will once again allow an unelected, unaccountable body make decisions on how our communities evolve and grow. Whereas on August 21st, 2018, Minister Clark once again signed the MOU with the Association of Municipalities of Ontario and entered into a, quote, a legally binding agreement recognizing Ontario municipalities as a mature, accountable order of government. Whereas the MOU is enshrined in law as part of the Municipal Act and recognizes that as public policy issues are complex and thus require coordinated responses, the province endorses the principle of regular consultation between Ontario and municipalities in relation to the matters of mutual interest. Whereas by signing this agreement, the province made a commitment to cooperate with its municipal governments in considering new legislation or regulations that will have municipal impact. Whereas Bill 108 will impact 15 different acts: the Cannabis Control Act 2017, Conservation Authorities Act, Development Charges Act, Education Act, Endangered Species Act 2007, the Environmental Assessment Act, the Environmental Protection Act, Labor Relations Act 1995, the Local Planning Appeal Tribunal Act 2017, Municipal Act 2001, Occupational Health and Safety Act, the Ontario Heritage Act, the Ontario Water Resources Act, the Planning Act, Workplace Safety Insurance Act 1997. Now, therefore, be it resolved that the Town of Oakville oppose Bill 108, which in its current state will have negative consequences on community building and proper planning, and that the Town of Oakville call upon the Government of Ontario to halt the legislative advancement of Bill 108 to enable fulsome consultation with municipalities to ensure that its objectives for sound decision-making for housing growth that meet local needs will be reasonably achieved, and that a copy of this motion be sent to the Honourable Doug Ford, Premier of Ontario, the Honourable Christine Elliott, Deputy Premier, the Honourable Steve Clark, Minister of Municipal Affairs and Housing, the Honourable Andrea Horvath, Leader of the New Democratic Party, and all MPPs in the Province of Ontario, and that a copy of this motion be sent to the Association of Municipalities of Ontario, AMO, and all municipalities for their consideration. So thank you for giving me an opportunity to move this motion. I want to thank my seconder and apologize to my seconder for the miscommunication on the presentation of the motion. But notwithstanding that, I do wish to read a couple of comments into the record, and as follows. On December 17th, 2017, the government of the day delivered all of us an early Christmas present, and it changed for the better with the passing of Bill 139 and the creation of the Local Planning Appeal Tribunal. This day, years of advocacy paid off when 86 of the 87 members present that day voted for the third reading of Bill 139. In the end, the bill was supported by every Liberal, New Democrat, and Progressive Conservative MPP in the legislature that day. Now, for those of you who are trivia fans, the only dissenting vote was independent MPP Jack McLaren. Now, amongst the yeas that day were today's Minister of Municipal Affairs and Housing, Steve Clark, and Minister of Finance, Vic Fedeli. Within the many proposals in Bill 108, we heard a couple of other ones this evening, we are witnessing a giant leap backwards by reverting to the old OMB rules that we all despised. As an example of the changes under 108, amongst other implications, the LPAT made appeal rules that compelled tribunal members to test if a council's decision conformed to local planning policies. The old rules will award the tribunal the ability to override municipal decisions regardless of the council's position on the development file. Now, we all know the Ford government is heck-bent on speeding up the supply of housing. However, whether you support that notion or not, the regressive changes to the appeal process contemplated under Bill 108 ignore the fundamental reason why developments are often stalled. Because of the appeals by some developers who simply can't follow the rules. Now, instead of building what is allowed through local planning, they instead demand amendment after amendment to our official plans, overloading the planning tribunal with unnecessary appeals, and then wonder why they can't build because cases take so long to be heard by the bogged-down LPAT. Now, we need to send an all-party message to Queen's Park that this change is not welcome and not in the best interests of the citizens that we mutually serve in our respective assemblies. This bill is now going through second reading, and time is of the essence to make sure that our voices are heard, thus the rush to seek your support to move this forward today. While we're not a partisan body, this council is a great cross-section of women and men from all political stripes. A unanimous vote tonight will mimic the tripartisan Queen's Park LPAT vote from 2017 and send a message to our two local MPPs and the Ford administration reminding them that people from all parties and points of view support the principle that local planning is the best planning. And with that, Your Worship, I request a recorded vote.
Thank you very much. Councillor Elgar, would you like to speak to it?
The only thing I'd like to say is I fully support what's coming forward, and I think I'm just hoping that Tom Maracas from Aurora sent this to every municipality in Ontario and everybody deals with it because he was the author of this and did a heck of a good job. So I absolutely agree. A recorded vote. It's like the word has to get out here of how bad this is and backward. It's
I can tell you that the other local municipalities in Halton are also going to be considering this motion. And at the next regional council meeting, the mayors have discussed bringing it forward there as well in an effort to really try to raise our voices loudly. And with that, I will ask for other speakers. And if there are none, I'll ask you to rise to be named to show your support for the resolution. Councillor Sandu, Councillor Palmer, Councillor Lischina, Councillor Adams, Councillor Grant, Councillor Knoll, Councillor Longo, Councillor Elgar, Councillor Haslett-Thiel, Councillor Giddings, Councillor Chisholm, Councillor Dudek, Councillor Robertson, Councillor O'Meara, and Mayor Burton. I declare the resolution carried unanimously. And I thank you, everyone, for your time and attention to that. If there is any business concerning emergencies or congratulatory or condolence, it's time. If not, we need a mover and seconder. Oh, Councillor Dudek.
Your Worship, I just wanted to wish our colleague a happy 40th birthday. I understand he reached a milestone.
What key shall we sing happy birthday in? I couldn't quite figure out what key that groan was. Well, how about we have a mover and seconder for the bylaws then? Councillor Dudek and Councillor Lischina. This is authority for the bylaws as listed in the agenda, 2917, 20, 29, 53, and 56, the bylaw to confirm the proceedings of a meeting of council. All in favor? Opposed, if any? The bylaws are adopted. Thank you, everybody, for your time and attention. It's been great working with you, and we are adjourned.